Mount Savage, Maryland.
Okay, we're ready.
It's out in the mountains.
Good evening. Welcome. I call this Iowa City Community School Board meeting on Tuesday, May 8th, 2018 to order. My name is Janet Godwin, and I want to thank those in the audience, those watching on television, and those following us on Twitter for joining us tonight. I'll start by introducing those at the table with me. To my right, Superintendent Steve Murley, Directors Ruthina Malone, Phil Hemingway, Lori Rotland, J.P. Clausen, Sean Eystone, Paul Ressler, and Kim Colvin, Recording Secretary. The public is reminded that if they wish to speak, they need to complete a speaker form found at the table in the lobby and turn it in. During community comment, persons may speak to the board about topics relevant to the district. All community comment directed at non-agenda items and agenda items shall take place at the beginning of the meeting during the community comment section of the agenda. Okay, we will move into our student representative update. Tegan?
I'm dressed very appropriately for the weather, by the way.
Anyway, good evening, school board members. As we close out the year, AP testing has begun. Earlier this year, City High pursued programs to bring the amount of minority participation in AP tests up, and it has bared results. City High has seen a 24% increase in minority students participating in AP testing this year. We're as well as pleased that the ACE class has begun construction of a storage shed at Bates Field. Now, this is a very big and exciting one. Joe Russo, the co-director of the worldwide phenomenon Avengers Infinity War, visited City High School on April 30th. He visited our high school just 3 days after this massive film released to the public. So that was a very exciting event at the school that leads. Little Shop of Horrors was a remarkable success, drawing in a huge audience for all 4 performances on that weekend. The band took a trip down to St. Louis last weekend, enjoying the city as well as performing. City High would also like to thank you for the switch to one-to-one laptops. It has been a positive change having all of our work online and concentrated in one form. And finally, thank you, School Board, for the past year. It has been a remarkable year at the school that leads. Now, as my outfit suggests, I'm ready to get out and enjoy summer. I look forward to giving the speech at graduation and teaching them all to say goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Tegan. Thank you for being here at all these board meetings and your service as president of City High.
Thank you. Is Zena here from West High? How about Liberty High, Shane? Or Savannah from Tate? Okay, we will move into the ICEA update. Brady Shutt.
Hi, President Godwin, Vice President Rowland, Directors, Superintendent Murley, thank you for having me. Just real quick, this time of the year, of course, is a time of transition for some of our teachers and employees, and I know that the board knows probably this data, but I just want to make sure that the public has it as well. So this year we have 46 retiring teachers who represent 1,034 collective years of experience in the teaching profession. Which is just a profound number, and teaching is a very humbling profession, and to just think about the lives that they've touched and the difference that they've made is really, it's quite remarkable. So I'd just like to just have a moment to recognize them for all of the work they've done, and of course to wish them well in their next adventures. Thanks.
Thanks, Brady. The Silver Salute recognition was fantastic for that group, as well as the 25-year teachers, and so it was fantastic, and that was also a really nice tribute to the work that they've done for us. So, thank you. Community comment. Okay, we will start with Esther Puderbaugh and Olivia Lehman.
Good evening. My name is Esther Puderbaugh, and I'm a 5th grader here in Iowa City. I live at 420 2nd Avenue. I am here tonight to address a topic that affects all students, dress codes. A few days ago, I first heard of someone getting dress coded. The friend was wearing a spaghetti-strap tank top, and a teacher reprimanded her for it. 2 days later, another friend was dress coded for the same issue. The dress code states that kids can't wear items of clothing like tank tops with spaghetti straps. It seems unreasonable to care about what little kids wear on hot days. More importantly, the dress code gives a reason for prohibiting these articles of clothing. The code states that an individual's appearance and attire can influence both others' behaviors and an individual's own self-image and behavior. The policy indirectly states to me that if I wear something to school tomorrow where my shoulder blades are showing, boys are going to be distracted by my shoulder blades. This policy centers around classroom control and how the way girls dress apparently changes boys' behavior. This makes girls feel like they are responsible for boys' behavior. It also makes girls feel like their bodies are the problem. Dress codes are demeaning to girls in this way. This also assumes that boys in elementary school care about and pay attention to a girl in a spaghetti-strapped tank top. This is also unfair for boys in the sense that they are being judged by adults. It assumes that boys can't be held responsible for their own behavior. Dress codes are applied unfairly, depending on what a kid looks like. For example, a recent study by the National Women's Law Center of Schools in Washington, D.C. found that African American girls are disproportionately punished for dress code violations. Dress codes don't seem all that necessary to me at the elementary level, aside from the last point in the dress code, which bans crude or hateful language on clothing, etc. I believe the dress code should be rewritten, and that you should include students in the process. This way you can make sure the policy doesn't discriminate against anyone. Dress codes make kids think that their school cares more about their appearance than their education. This is not the school environment anyone should be put in. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Olivia Layman. I go to Hoover Elementary and I'm in 5th grade. First of all, I just want to say that I'm not only speaking for myself. We're speaking for all of the girls around the world who are criticized for the clothes that they wear to school. I have never heard of a boy being told that what they're wearing is against the dress code. Dress codes target girls and discriminate against them. When you tell a girl that she can't wear something to school, you are basically telling her that her clothes are more important than her education. You are telling her that boys are more worthy of an education than she is. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both. Up next, Madison Freundlich and Sylvia Plank, and following them will be Massimo Biggers.
Hello, I'm Sylvia Plank. My address is 3 Glendale Terrace, Iowa City, Iowa 52245. I'm 11 years old and in 5th grade at a Hoover Elementary School. And I am here speaking in front of you today because of the Iowa City School dress code. About a week ago, my friend got dress coded by a teacher for wearing spaghetti straps. And a few days later, another one of my friends had the same thing happen to her. And me and my friends were outraged. We couldn't believe that us girls can't show our collarbone or shoulder blades just because boys apparently can't stay focused when our shoulder blades are showing. I find this concept very unfair. I'm here today asking you to please take this problem into consideration. We're here using our voices to stand up for what's right. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Madison Freundlich, and I'm a 5th grader at Hoover Elementary School. I am here today to bring up the issue called dress code. About 2 weeks ago, I was dress coded by a teacher at my school for wearing spaghetti straps that was supposedly inappropriate for school. I felt and still feel discriminated against. I don't think spaghetti straps should be considered inappropriate. And then a couple days later, another one of my friends had the same thing happen to her. It also happened to me in kindergarten. It was 95 degrees, so my mom put me in a halter top dress. But then at recess, a teacher made me put on a sweater, which put my health at risk. I think it's outrageous that girls are prohibited from wearing spaghetti straps, or really anything showing our shoulders, shoulder blades, or too much leg, for the sake of giving boys a distraction-free learning environment, because apparently my shoulders are distracting to the male students. But let me tell you one thing. Boys in elementary school don't care about what girls are wearing. They only care about their hair, Fortnite, or are completely in their own worlds. Boys don't even have a dress code. So I think it's completely unfair to girls and to make them cover up, especially when it's 80 degrees outside. Your dress code is sexist, and I'd rather get suspended 1,000,000 times over for voicing my opinion, rather than supporting rules that keep our already sexist society alive. What is the point of a dress code anyway? All I ask is that you take this problem into consideration, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. Well said. And following Massimo, we have Will Dixon.
Hello, my name is Massimo Biggers. I am a 7th grader at Southeast Junior High. I am here as part of my castle schoolwork, but I am also here because I am deeply concerned about climate change, and I know that school boards across the country are taking action to deal with this urgent issue. This past April, for the first time in human history, greenhouse gas emissions passed over 410 parts per million for the entire month. Scientists call this growing level of carbon emissions throughout the month a dangerous milestone. Climate change is an urgent problem now, not just the future. Extreme weather driven by climate change results in over $300 billion in damages in 2017, according to a recent study. Here in Iowa, flooding and even increased diseases from ticks are a growing problem. Meanwhile, millions of people are forced to leave their homes and become refugees from extreme weather every year. Some of my friends and schoolmates from Sudan, for example, have left their countries due to extreme drought and unlivable conditions. Coal is one of the main contributors to climate change. In Iowa, coal provides 60% of our electricity. Despite that, it contributes nearly 30% of our CO2 emissions. Coal, which is now powering this microphone, also comes from devastating coal mine operations. My own family lost our ancestral farm to strip mining, and members of our family have struggled with black lung disease as miners. But here's the good news. With dramatic prices, solar energy, along with wind energy and other renewable sources, can now replace coal-fired electricity, according to a new study by the Bloomberg New Energy Finance, dramatically reducing CO2 emissions. So solar is good for the environment. No pollution, no mining, no burning. I understand this firsthand. I have solar panels on my house, and so do my grandparents. It's easy and inexpensive. Now Will Dixon will explain more on solar.
Hello, my name is Will Dixon, and I am a 7th grader at Southeast Junior High. Over 5,500 schools use solar power in the U.S. All of these schools are saving tons of money on electricity bills and are educating kids about renewable energy. Is solar good for Iowa? Yes, Iowa is ranked 16th in the U.S. for solar potential. In fact, in the Waco School District in nearby Crawfordsville, they were suffering from a major budget crisis, so they put up solar to save money. Solar panels have cut electric costs by 90% since January 2015, allowing the school to stay open. What about Iowa City? This month, Johnson County administrators are leading workshops to solarize Johnson County. Johnson County already has solar panels on many buildings installed through a power purchase agreement. In 2015, a local solar panel committee in Iowa City found 26 buildings that could be immediately fitted with solar panels to save money for the district. In 2015, parents held forms to collect petitions. The Iowa City School District even formed a solar committee. So what happened? 3 years later, the costs are even lower for more buildings and schools. Thanks to the Iowa Supreme Court decision, zero down power purchase agreements are also available. As Massimo noted, climate change is an urgent issue today. At the same time, we have a great opportunity to join thousands of other schools and produce our own electricity through solar energy. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Next up, Carolyn Barker, and following Carolyn, we have Ian Corbin.
My name is Carolyn Barker. I am a student at Northwest Junior High. In my second trimester seminar class, the focus was on city planning. We got into a discussion about housing and ended up talking about our school's climate. We knew that some kids were misbehaving and some kids were feeling unsafe, and that the Student Advisory Center wasn't working. We wanted to look at options for dealing with misbehavior and what other schools do for discipline. Some of my classmates and I did some research and became interested in learning more about restorative practices. We heard about community building circles and got to experience one with our principal, Ms. Cottrell. Ms. Cottrell then offered us the chance to learn more about how circles work and how to facilitate them. Even though our learning was disjointed because of our class schedule, we were able to see the ways that circles can help. Circles can improve relationships between students, help kids get to know other students they might not have known otherwise, have more interesting class discussions where everyone gets a chance to contribute, offer a place for students and teachers to hear each other's perspective and learn from each other, and help kids avoid conflicts. We learned that implementing circles is a big change that will take time, but we think they would be a great way to improve school climate and student satisfaction with school. We also learned that the best way to understand what circles can do is to participate in one. For this reason, we want to encourage you, the school board directors, to join a community building circle so you can understand too. If you're interested, you can contact Just Connect. Thank you.
Thank you. Ian Corbin, and following Ian is Natalie Corbin.
Hello, my name is Ian Corbin. I grew up in the public schools in Iowa City, and I live on Hollywood Boulevard. I'm concerned about the sexual ethics that will be taught with new LGBTQ curriculum changes, as they may conflict with my faith and the faith of others in this community. I would like to read a passage from the Bible that speaks to this. Or do you not know, so this is 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 9 through 11. Or do you not know that the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived. Neither the sexually immoral, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor men who practice homosexuality, nor thieves, nor the greedy, nor drunkards, nor revilers, nor swindlers will inherit the kingdom of God. And such were some of you. But you were washed, you were sanctified, you were justified in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ and by the Spirit of our God. So what we see here is that although sin separates us from God, in God's kingdom, we can be washed and transformed in the name of Jesus. My church has people that were drunkards, adulterers, and practice homosexuality, but these things no longer define who they are or their identities. Their new identity is as members of God's kingdom and children of the King. I care about having a safe learning environment where students with different ideas can discuss freely, but at the same time, parents should have the ability to remove their children from class if they see any conflict with the curriculum. I'm especially concerned about this since students as young as kindergarten may be exposed to the new curriculum changes. Currently, parents can have easily remove their children from sex ed class because it's either confined to a single unit or a class. But if the new LGBTQ material is infused throughout the curriculum, it may become difficult for parents to know what and when the material is being taught. This particularly affects lower income families that may not be able to afford private or homeschool. Another concern I have is for teachers. Will they be required to celebrate sexual ethics that they disagree with? Will older students, such as high school, be able to have free and open dialogue about different sexual ethics? Since the board's statement on this matter asks for celebration of the LGBTQ sexual ethic, it seems that free dialogue will be limited. What we should all agree on, though, is that teaching kindness and respect of each other, even when we disagree, is something that we can all embrace, and I think this is what should be taught rather than a sexual ethic, particular sexual ethic that is contrary to some people's faith in our community. And I believe that the Cedar Rapids School District already has a program for this. I want an environment where different ideas can be discussed with love. So if anyone wants to continue this conversation in a different setting, whether you disagree with me or not, I just want to open my house to you, and we can talk over dinner some night. I'll wait in the entrance but for about 5 minutes after this meeting is adjourned, and just let me know if you want to hit me up on this. Thanks.
Thank you, Ian. Natalie Corbin, and following Natalie is Beth Noller.
Hello, my name is Natalie Corbin, and I'm also here to talk about the LGBTQ curriculum changes and just my concern over them. I want to start out by just acknowledging the fact that I admire the fact that the board is concerned about the safety of the students in the school, not just physical safety, but that children feel comfortable and that they feel like they're in an environment that they can learn in. I think that is very important. We see that as being an important factor in children being able to learn. But when we were listening to what the board was discussing and the policies that they wanted to be implementing, it seemed almost as if the board was missing the root issue. To me, it doesn't seem like changing an entire curriculum or infusing an entire curriculum with LGBTQ components necessarily deals with the issue of bullying, which seems like it's the heart of it. When I heard these kids up here talking, they were talking about being in classrooms and having other kids say things that were mean and not having a teacher know how to step in and intervene, or or just the fact that having those kids say those things. It seems like the main issues are character and bullying, and I feel like if we just implement one specific curriculum thinking, hey, this is going to fix the problem, the bullying and the character is just going to shift to a different group because you're not addressing the heart, the real issue. And I think that the board should think about just allowing different voices to speak into how you address this issue. If safety is a real issue, that you've seen the results from these surveys, that you would allow a lot of people to speak into it that come from different perspectives in order to really address the issue, because we want to do something that is evidence-based, that makes sense, that the curriculum changes or the things that are implemented are actually going to affect the root issue and not just put a Band-Aid on something that doesn't help anything. I think that one of my concerns is that if you are trying to push a specific sexual ethic in order for those kids to not feel bullied, that then the kids that have a different sexual ethic all of a sudden might become the kids that are the bullied ones, because you're pushing one thing as this has to be the truth, and the kids that believe something different might not be able to speak anymore. And I think that the best kind of public education would be to allow kids to think critically, to allow kids to hear opposing ideas, not bullying, but saying, you know, I think something different about that, and we can still be friends. We can still learn math together. We can still learn science together. And if we take that component out by pushing one specific sexual ethic, I think that that can really hurt that dynamic. It can really polarize that dynamic. And so I ask that the board would just consider these things, that they would really look at what's a real root issue that's pushing this curriculum changes. How do we really address the heart of what these results are telling us, and be slow in the process, really get really thorough, like as much information about other districts, what they've done. I know I grew up in Omaha, and we had a characters counts thing all in elementary school, and talking about the importance of like courage and honesty and just having those pillars. Maybe that's just what we need in the elementary schools. We need kids to learn good character so that they know how to deal with when someone calls someone a bad name, or someone gets left out because they're different than everyone else. So that's just something I would like the board to really consider when they're making these decisions.
Thank you, Natalie. Beth, and following Beth, Cindy Redlinger.
I come to you as a former teacher, a grandmother, and a current school volunteer who loves children. Excerpts from 8 points from the American College of Pediatricians on Gender Identity in Children. Point 1, human sexuality is an objective biological binary trait. XY and XX are genetic markers of health, not genetic markers of a disorder. The norm for human design is to be conceived either male or female. Human sexuality is binary by design, with the obvious purpose of being reproducing and flourishing as a species. This principle is self-evident. The exceedingly rare disorders of sexual differentiation of DSDs are medically identifiable and do not constitute a third sex. Point 2, no one is born with a gender. Everyone is born with a biological sex. Gender is an awareness of the sense of oneness as male or female, is a sociological and psychological concept, not an objective biological one. No one is born with an awareness of themselves as male or female. This awareness develops over time, and like all developmental processes, may be derailed by the child's subjective perceptions, relationships, adverse experiences from infancy forward. People who identify as feeling like the opposite sex or somewhere in between do not comprise a third sex. They remain biological men or biological women. Point 3, a person's belief that he or she is something that they are not, at best, is a sign of confused thinking. When an otherwise healthy biological boy believes that he is a girl, or an otherwise healthy biological girl believes that she is a boy, an objective psychological problem exists that lies in the mind, not the body, and it should be treated as such. These children suffer from gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoria, GD, formerly listed as gender identity disorder, GID, is a recognized mental disorder in the most recent edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association, DSM-5. Point 4, puberty is not a disease, and puberty-blocking hormones can be dangerous. I skipped point 5. Point 6, children who use puberty blockers to impersonate the opposite sex will require cross-sex hormones in late adolescence. Cross-sex hormones are associated with dangerous health risks, including but not limited to high blood pressure, blood clots, stroke, and cancer. Rates of suicide are 20 times greater among adults who use cross-sex hormones and undergo sex reassignment surgery. Even in Sweden, which is one of the most LGBTQ-affirming countries, what compassionate, reasonable person would condemn a young child to this fate, knowing that after puberty, as many as 88% of girls and 98% of boys will eventually accept reality and achieve a state of mental and physical health? Point 8, conditioning children into believing a lifetime of chemical and surgical impersonation of the opposite sex is normal and healthful is child abuse. Endorsing gender discordance as normal via public education and legal policies will confuse children and parents, leading more children to present to gender clinics where they will be given puberty-blocking drugs. This, in turn, virtually ensures that they will choose a lifetime of carcinogenic or otherwise toxic cross-sex hormones and likely consider unnecessary surgical mutilation of their healthy body parts as young adults. Facts, not ideology, determine reality. From what I have read and listened to from the past board meetings, it is my understanding that some students feel humiliated, unsafe, and anxious. How many other untapped subgroups feel the same uncertainties? Is the board going to issue a statement of inclusion for every subgroup that feels threatened? Those that are too tall, the overweight, the geeks, the nerds, the shy, recent immigrants, those who cover their heads, those who don't, Christians, those who are Sudanese, those from Mexico or from Alabama? I believe that the larger, all-encompassing issue should be giving teacher empowerment to control classrooms and address bullying rather than implementing a total curricular realignment for one affected subgroup. This is the Pandora's box that you want to give children who are less able than adults to deal with the ramifications. Thank you.
Beth. Cindy Redlinger, followed by Tony Malcusack.
Greetings, President Godwin and all board members. I am Cindy Redlinger, 305 Dartmouth Street in Iowa City. For the last several weeks, I've been contemplating issues connected with the concerns of the LGBTQ students. I believe I am correct in assuming the actual curriculum has not been presented to the board. I do not know if full disclosure will be sent to every parent before the board votes, or if that is not the plan. Some may believe that the push for this curriculum in all subjects is based on the climate survey, but actually the homosexual agenda was almost put through approximately 10 years ago and failed. Let me make it clear that I am in agreement with efforts to ensure everyone is equally safe, protected from bullying, and that each student has an equal presence in the classroom. No more, no less for any student. And kindness toward fellow students should be the order of the day. Beyond this, I am deeply concerned. Most parents have a desire to guide and protect their children and sincerely want them to experience what would be beneficial for them, short and long term. It would seem like sometimes our government entities, including the district, lose sight of who they're serving and sometimes come across with, we have authority over your child and we will do what we choose to do. In reference, as I was looking at your non-discrimination policy, in my view, the LGBTQ curriculum, K through 12, in all subjects, becomes discriminatory if a parent or student believes this curriculum to oppose their values, beliefs, practices, and ethnic preferences. Then it seems that this curriculum would be forced exposure against two of those words, creed or religion. The curriculum, as far as I know, provides no other options. In light of the requirements of this curriculum, diversity could be considered no longer as a paramount goal of the district, and many types of diversity would become secondary or totally ignored if this curriculum was put in place. Another term that is in the policy is socioeconomic. I would like to make a comment on that term. If the district, with approval of the board, would choose to force this curriculum on approximately 13,000 students, then only the wealthy are likely to be able to remove their children from the impact of this district policy. And since no options are being planned that I know of, parents with less wealth would struggle to be able to possibly choose homeschooling or pay for private schooling. I would ask you as board members to vote against advancing this extreme agenda using children and adolescents in this district. As I mentioned earlier, I would expect a full and true disclosure of the entire curriculum, what it would be initially and further future goals, and that would be sent to every parent with a generous time provision for public comment and written response before the board votes.
Thank you, Cindy. Tony? And following Tony, we'll have Lucy Barker.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Tony Melcusack, and I'm a parent of two children in the school district, a senior at City High and a child in 6th grade who has special needs. And I've come here tonight to talk to you again about inclusive play. I see this as an opportunity for this board to be great, as I will say. I want to challenge the board to pass a resolution on stating that all playground environments are going to be inclusive for the Iowa City Community School District. Up until this point, we haven't had that direction from the board where there have been processes and such, and you know, with all due respect to staff and such who have poured many efforts and passion into providing the best play environments for our children, we need the board to step up and share with us exactly what that bar is for inclusive play, because we leave a back door open for process to regress to the mean, and by that I mean just having an ADA compliant play environment. That's not good enough for our children. So again, I want to challenge the board to bring this as an important discussion and pass a resolution on inclusive play environments. In closing, I want to say, actually quote from a book called Can Play, Will Play by A. John and R. Weiwei from England, talking about inclusive play. And they state, enabling all children to play and play together is about a benefit to the whole community. It is not about overcoming legal hurdles or making expensive provision for a small section of the community. If any child is prevented from playing, then it diminishes the play experience of all. Thank you very much for your time and listening to me, and I appreciate any dialogue or conversation about this in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Lucy, and following Lucy, Amy Bayan.
I'm Lucy Barker, 1143 Penkridge Drive. I'm here tonight as a member of Just Connect, a group of trained circle keepers and facilitators, and supporter of the Equity Committee's presentation to you later this evening. But I didn't start out a restorative practices advocate. I went as a curious parent to a community building circle held in the evening at Northwest Junior High in spring of 2017. It was a small circle, only 5 or 6 of us, and I think we just talked about what was happening in our lives. I left that circle with such a feeling of satisfaction and even joy, connected to people I hadn't even met before that night. I also felt the trust and safety of a circle when all of us shared personal stories we normally wouldn't share with strangers. I understood the power of circles even without knowing much about them. When the opportunity to attend a training to become a circle keeper came last November, I took it. After that training, I joined with other trained facilitators to bring circles to as many groups in the Iowa City community as we can. We've held circles with staff at some of your schools and at a conference at the College of Education, and have received positive feedback and interest in learning more about circles and restorative practices. Some of the feedback includes, we would really benefit as a staff, and this would be a plus for a much better way to meet the needs of kids, staff, and parents. This would be helpful at my school, very helpful. So needed for our school family. I urge you to learn more about restorative practices and how to implement them district-wide. Restorative practices work. They have the power to make schools safer, increase student achievement, improve school climates, empower students to solve problems nonviolently, and change lives. But restorative practices need to be implemented with fidelity, and that means a commitment of adequate training, personnel, funding, support, and time. I hope that you, the school board, and district administration will make these commitments so that we can begin to make changes that truly put our students first.
Thank you. Amy? And following Amy, Lisa Graham.
We're all speaking on the same topic. We live in Cardinal Ridge, which is in Borlaug District. We received a letter in April that stated that our residences were less than 2 miles away from Northwest Junior High School, and our 6th graders going into 7th grade would not be entitled to busing next year. We drove the route after we received that letter, and it was over 2 miles from our residences. When we contacted the district to tell them that we thought they were incorrect, they said no, that they had used a different route, which is not the most passable and safest route. Instead, they chose the blind road, which is Camp Cardinal Road. It's a hill. We're at several points in the hill. You can't see who's coming or going. There's no sidewalks, and it also becomes impassable many times during the year due to weather.
There's no shoulder either, actually.
And it drops off into a ravine on both sides. So I don't drive that road sometimes. I don't let my kids go on that road. And furthermore, the buses don't even travel that road. We've never seen a school bus on it one time. City buses do not travel it either. So in the district's appeal letter, it says legal precedence requires this code to be interpreted for the route a school bus would drive to school. So if that's how you're determining the distance, how can you use it calculating that road? If you go the most passable and safest route, it is over 2 miles, and that's going to Kennedy, over the boulevard to 2nd Street, and over into Northwest Junior High School. So I don't know if
So on your appeal form that you ask us to fill out when we take issue with your calculation and
it says that the code is often misinterpreted to be the route a student would walk to school, not the route a school bus would drive to school. Legal precedent requires this code to be interpreted for the route a school bus would drive to school when mandatory transportation is in question. So it feels to us that you have used this really obscure, unreasonable route to calculate a distance merely to cut us off from this service and not even following your own guidelines or Iowa code. So it feels pretty clear to us that this has been done in error. And I have my Google map, if you want me to leave it with you, that shows.
Sure.
Would that be helpful?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
actually pictures of this road that's obviously no one would ever let their children walk on.
And through our HOA meetings, we've also learned that the city of Coralville is considering closing that road because it's unsafe, and there have been several accidents. So, you know, that road may not even be around for much longer. So, great.
Thank you.
And we are in the same neighborhood. For me, of course, my child's safety is my biggest concern. And if there's really no school bus, we will pay for that as both parents work. So we still need that school bus. And I think for the school district, at any circumstance, we should always put the kids' safety on first and then think about the others. That's the basis of the school. Thank you.
Thank you. This is on our agenda later this evening, so appreciate your comments.
Yeah, just a clarifying question. You said you spoke to somebody at the city of Coralville. Can you identify the?
I can get that information. It was just at our HOA meeting. We were discussing the, you know, the use of that road, and our HOA president commented that the city of Coralville has considered closing that road
Through traffic.
to through traffic.
So I think that I sent a mail to the city of Collier. They said that the city engineer is working on that. And I think that road initially is only for the camping people or hiking.
Yeah, that's
people. It's really not a kind of bus line or a car line. There's nothing in between to divide it to two directions. And in the morning, there's lots of kind of car drive up because they are going to Warlock. So it was a pretty busy road.
It's very,
in the
people,
morning.
people use it to cut through.
Used to cut through, so there's no way I could let my kids ever walk on there without us.
But even if, and someone at the school office told me that it had been decided that safest was not going to be a consideration. I don't know if that was correct. But nonetheless, it's not the route the bus takes, which seems to be clearly mandatory in this interpretation. So.
Yeah, I look at the Iowa state code. They still say that you need to be the safest one without thinking about, without when you think about if they are in a distance or not. The safety is still the first thing.
Thank you. Cherie Murphy, followed by Bob Montgomery.
Hello, Board, President, and members. I would like to address you tonight regarding the LGBTQ curriculum changes to reduce bullying in the Iowa City School District. So when I think about the changes that are being recommended to be introduced into the curriculum, I don't see where there's a connection between changing that and decreasing the amount of bullying that is seen in the schools. So I guess what I'm saying is I don't think that you can get there from here with that. So the outcome that you're looking for is the outcome I think we're all looking for, is to reduce bullying, but not for a single group. But we really want to reduce bullying across the board. So what we want is to have all students treated with respect. And I would challenge you to see that this is a heart change. And I think a really good example of this comes from two places. Did anyone see the movie Wonder, where the main character is befriended by a little boy from his school. However, although this little boy really enjoys the time that he's having with the main character, he, in the end, makes comments that would be considered comments that hurt the main character's feelings because he hasn't had a heart change. So he's had this outward change, and really what we're going for is that core change. And so when I think about that, what I say is kids today are just so aware of when people are judging others. Goodness knows I talk to my kids and they'll be, your mom, your face tells me that you're judging us. And so what we need to do is we need to have education programs where teachers and people who are parenting are aware that there needs to be this general acceptance. And when we accept people for who they are and we love them, then it really doesn't matter. We can avoid the bullying situations. So putting those pillars into education, I think, are key. So the other really good example I have of this is I'm medical. And years ago, when AIDS started, we started all types of precautions in the hospital. But in the end, what we were doing is we were segregating out a specific group. And we were saying, we want to use these precautions. And so people took this to the point where people really were hurt. They didn't feel like they were getting good care. They didn't feel that heart change, that compassion, which is one of the keys of what we want to provide. And so what we went to is we went to standard precautions. And so standard precautions are the basic level of infection control that should be used in the care of all patients at all times. And really, I think that's what we're searching for. We're searching to institute something where core heart changes occur, not that we change curriculum and we change the way students think. And we really have to start at the top down. And kids need to know that we mean it when we say, we love everybody just for who they are. Because as humans, everyone deserves our love and everyone deserves our respect. And that's all I want to say.
Thank you. Bob Montgomery, followed by Kathy Hansen.
Hi, I'm Bob Montgomery. I'm a volunteer at Mark Twain School. I've been there for a couple of years. I go in almost every day and listen to second graders read. I feel like I'm providing something that, you know, I try to provide something that teachers don't. They have really good teachers at this school. And so I try to do something a little different. So I go out in the hallways and walk with them and read and walk at the same time. Or go out in the courtyard. The courtyard is a beautiful thing at Mark Twain School. It's got 3 wings in the school, and there's a little courtyard area in the middle. And it came to our attention a few weeks ago that they're considering closing this in and building classrooms out of it. And we just think it would be a terrible shame because it's a beautiful place. The kids love going out there. I love going out there. The teachers like it too. And so I hope you reconsider closing the courtyard in. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kathy Hansen, and I am the library secretary at Twain. The courtyard is a new thing. We just got an addition in, I don't know, 5 years ago or so. This is a new and very beautiful thing that Twain has gotten. And frankly, it's another classroom. It's an outdoor classroom, and it's a safe space, and since the weather has gotten better, I've seen teachers taking their classes out there. It's a wonderful place to have. Twain's bursting at the seams and filling in this one precious little jewel that we have that we've just been given, filling that in with a classroom is not going to do it. We need, as much as everyone dislikes temporaries, we need at least a 4-plex out back. We have so many teachers at our school, not just classroom teachers, but ELL and resource and band and music. There are so many people, and there is no space for them. Absolutely no space. We have people literally using closets. So something needs to happen. Please don't take away this one thing that has been a beautiful addition to our school you need to think about a bigger picture. We're going to have more kids again next year. We're already overcrowded. We've got a population of kids that experience so much chaos at home and crowdedness at home. Let's not keep them crowded and packed into this little school and then take away this one beautiful thing too. We need more classrooms. We need to make it a bigger place for these kids. They need to have room to get away from each other and to study and learn. It's not conducive to keep them all packed together in giant class sizes. We need more space.
Thank you, Bob and Kathy. Next up, Lori Bauer, followed by Lisa Collier.
My name is Lori Bauer, and I teach at Southeast Junior High, and I'm a supporter of the Equity Committee as well. We requested training in restorative practices, and we received support from Director Botchway. We found that the typical ways that we deal with student conflicts was separation, punitive approaches, and they just weren't working anymore. On our journey, we're in our very beginning stages of this, but on our journey, we found that there are recommended strategies for implementation and that there is well-documented successful and unsuccessful implementations. And I think that we can look to that information to guide us in the future. I think it can help us focus our resources and can help us develop that growth mindset that we really want to foster in our schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. Lisa, followed by Annie Tucker.
Hi, I'm Lisa Collier. I am the librarian at Mark Twain Elementary School, and I'm going to speak today on behalf of at least 25 staff members. So this letter is not a letter just from me, it's from many of our staff members who've been able to read it and comment, and so it's kind of a collaborative effort. And I'm just going to read it because I'm really nervous because you're all over 12 years old. As staff members at Mark Twain Elementary, we would like to present you with some input and very real concerns we have for Iowa City Community School District students, families, and staff. The first issue we would like to address is that of space at Twain. We would like the issue of overcrowding to be properly addressed by administration and school board. While our enrollment numbers might indicate that we are within the capacity of the building, there are a number of factors that are not reflected in these numbers. So let's start with some current numbers. Currently, we have 16 regular-sized classrooms and 4 extra-large classrooms with bathrooms, which are for kindergarten and preschool. That's obviously a total of 20. We have 21 classes that require a full-size classroom or larger. We also, in our building, currently have 7 small group spaces, only 6 if the small temporary that was installed this year is not included. But we have 13 support staff that need at least a small group space to teach or meet with students and families. And they're listed here, and I can give you a copy of this if you'd like. The library space has been reduced 3 times in the past 6 years for an IT closet, 2 ELL teaching spaces, and most recently this year, 3 reading teachers are also in the library. We currently have no tables and chairs, and any instruction that requires writing is done on the floor with clipboards. Twain qualifies to operate within the guidelines of the weighted resource allocation model. Nowhere in this model does it state that the model will apply contingent upon current available space. Twain's enrollment has only increased in the course of the school year during the past 5 years, so starting a school year with classes at the top of the weighted resource allocation model lacks forward thinking. Many of our students are volatile, reactive, and live in situations that do not afford them much, if any, personal space at home. Because of this, space is needed for students to calm down, take breaks, have a quiet time, step away from a setting that can be overwhelming to them at times. In reviewing the above facts about Twain's enrollment, student needs, and space, it seems clear that a plan to add 1 classroom in the current courtyard is short-sighted at best. The second issue we would like to address is our school environment. This year we have had staff members who have been threatened, kicked, punched, scratched, pushed, pulled, poked with sharp objects, given a black eye, called names that we wouldn't even think of typing into this document, all by students that we are supposed to be educating. We have had students wander the hallways for weeks on end, interrupt instruction, and destroy property. Some of this has happened without being witnessed by other students, but unfortunately we have not been able to shield young bystanders from much of it. When and where would this kind of learning and working environment be considered safe and acceptable? Clearly, this is not an environment that's conducive to teaching and learning for anyone, including the students who are displaying the above-mentioned behaviors. If we are now, quote, educating every student at every school in lieu of designating specific sites to attend to extreme needs, then much more support is needed. In fact, we are desperate for more support and guidance from the district that we serve. We need to know how to efficiently and effectively educate students with extreme behavior disorders so that they don't continue through entire school years having made little to no progress behaviorally or academically. We also need to know how to protect ourselves and other students from the emotional and physical ramifications of these behaviors. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, we would like to address the issue of school boundaries. The fact that the vast majority of our students who are living in poverty attend a select handful of schools is not only avoidable, but frankly, in our opinion, appalling. The same is true for having students who live in emergency housing attending one school. That's Twain. Our staff is well-educated, hardworking group of people who, at the risk of sounding self-aggrandizing, consider ourselves to be professional, caring, and more than competent. Yet the challenges that come with trying desperately to meet the needs of so many students who have experienced or are experiencing trauma is overwhelming. And the effects that secondary trauma has on both students and staff is very real, all-consuming, and intense. This would all be more understandable if we were a large metropolitan district where the population of most schools are similar to ours, with nearly 80% qualifying for free and reduced lunch and with extremely high mobility. For example, at Twain this year, we've had over 80 students enroll since the first day of school in August and over 40 exit in that same time frame. In the Iowa City Community School District, however, having schools with high concentrations of children who live in poverty and trauma is a choice. Our administration and school boards have a history of repeatedly, year after year, choosing this environment for a good percentage of our students, families, and staff members. This choice seems negligent at the very least. Some vocal members of Iowa City's liberal, inclusive community at large seem to have a fear of children who look and or live differently than they do. Unlike many communities in Iowa City we are fortunate to have the opportunity for all kindergarten through 12th grade students to experience cultural, ethnic, socioeconomic, and other modes of diversity. Yet year after year, we choose not to change boundaries to better balance our free and reduced lunch and emergency housing populations. We choose not to afford the majority of our students this opportunity to develop a better understanding and sensitivity to those who are different from themselves. We choose to let the irrational fear of some in our community inform our decisions. Shame on us. Teachers are expected to regularly submit lessons that address diversity to our equity department. We attend professional development sessions to help us learn more about implicit bias and how to make sure that we present content that is inclusive and acknowledges and celebrates differences. We, as a staff, think it is only right for our administration and school board to start leading by example. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Sir?
Brought treats. Okay, my name's Annie Tucker. I live at 1425 Oaklawn Avenue. I also direct a local nonprofit, Mediation Services of Eastern Iowa. We've had a restorative justice program for juveniles that are referred from various sources for 4 years. And we also provided 2 3-day circle trainings in November and invited all the teachers and staff and administrators in the school district to attend for $50. And so we had about 15 takers, as well as lots of folks throughout the community. So I want to start tonight by just reading an email I got from a teacher who got trained in November. She's actually a counselor in an elementary school. I'm not going to give her name because she may come and speak to you directly, and I don't have permission to do that, but I think you'll like hearing it. She says, I really wish I could come tonight. Unfortunately, I have a previous commitment. I've been using circles for some conflicts, and I've had students request them after experiencing it or hearing about it from friends. I've also been using circles in classroom guidance, and have received a lot of positive feedback from students. They love that it gives them an equal voice, that they get to know each other and feel safe. Wow, right? Wow. I mean, to our credit as a district, we do a good job of getting a read on the climate and on the disparities in academic performance and in the disparities on use of discipline. And this is what we would want for our kids, right? Because if they feel safe, if they get to know each other, if they feel good about themselves and valued, they're going to do better academically. And actually, there's research that tells us that doing circles in schools and using other restorative practices do affect the academic disparity that so many districts, I mean, we're not alone in this, right? And the discipline disparity, we're not alone in this. We don't have to refigure it out, right? For kids to feel connected and valued. I have some other things I want to say, but it's interesting, when I first got into this, I was, let's see, where are the numbers? 1 minute left? It goes so fast. Anyway, I had to do some research, and it said essentially that restorative justice came from indigenous folks, which we know, and the purpose was, if there was a transgressor, for them to know that they were still part of the community. When I read that, I realized that most of the youth that we were working with did not feel like part of the community, in school or our community. So what to do? So Laura Cottrell and I went and got trained, and we've been doing community circles. I'm just looking at the time. So I think that restorative justice practices, including circles, imagine kindergartners every day of their lives through at least elementary school, being in a circle. It's just a check-in circle. The talking piece is passed. Every kid gets a turn. At your turn, you have complete power over whether you speak or don't. You can pass, no shame, and keep going. But when you say something, Janet, in the circle, and usually we never talk to each other, but you say something, I feel connected with you because it's like, wow, that's what happened to my sister. So I begin feeling connected to people that maybe we don't talk. And at first I thought, that's going to be really powerful for our marginalized kids, the kids who don't feel connected. And it took me until a couple of months ago to realize, no, it's very powerful also for our kids who feel very connected, thank you very much, and have their own clique and don't need to know about some of the other kids. It will benefit all of them. Okay, time's up. Thanks. Oh, but what I did
Thank you.
We can't give you gifts. We can't, someone told us. I mean, there's a limit. And this goes beyond the limit. This is a book that was published 2018. It's research, real good research on how to really make the transition successfully rather than, oh, what a great idea. This is what works. So we have 7 of them. We're, Just Connect is contributing these to the school district's library.
Thank you.
All right. Mr. Moore.
Thank you so much. I'll just add, for any of those of you that had written statements that you'd like to share a copy with the board, please do so. You can email it to us at board@iowocityschools.org or provide copies if you have them tonight. Thank you all for the community comment portion of the meeting. I appreciate all the comments, insights, passions. It really makes us a better district to have all of the comments come forward to us. With that, I'll move on to the agenda approval section of our meeting. Any adjustments from board members, or is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. So moved. Sorry, trying to get my microphone here.
Second.
Kim, ready to vote?
Online voting is open.
Yay.
All votes have been cast, and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
Thank you. Next up, consent agenda. Oh, and Phil, bills.
Yeah. Did the bills on Friday. It was $3.9 million, of which $2.4 million was GO bond funding, and everything looked in order, and put that to be, I don't know if anyone else went in, but I looked at them on Friday, so.
Thank you, Phil.
As far as the consent agenda, I'd like to pull item 6.
Is there a motion to approve consent agenda items, consent agenda minus item 6?
So moved.
Second.
I'm ready to vote.
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast, and the motion carries with Directors Rotland, Ressler, Godwin, Clausen, Malone, and Eystone voting yea, and Director Hemingway voting nay.
Thank you. Agenda item 6, Phil.
Yeah, I just wanted a little more explanation on Avid. There were some questions brought up by a board member, and I'd just like it for information to the public. I know there's some foundation funding going into this. If there could be an explanation on that.
Well, there's no foundation funding going into it currently. I think that was what we're trying to plan for in the future. And so we've had some preliminary conversations with Susan Brennan as far as how we can make sure that there's funding in the future to support AVID as we move forward.
So
current,
all of this is general fund?
No. Currently, no, Director Hemingway. Currently, this has been paid out of our Coordinated Early Intervening Services Fund. That fund in particular is a siphon off of, or I can't remember the exact percentage of our special education funding, to focus on how we can how we can intervene early to affect some of our kiddos, going into special education. And so we're using that particular funding for that. We've done that since the beginning of AVID.
Okay.
Any further questions?
And there's some funding that comes from supplies and other things. They come out of the normal areas as far as supplies are concerned, but the AVID contract agreement and training has come out of that fund in particular.
So the contract that we see here tonight, how will that be paid for?
So that will be paid out of Title II funding for professional development of our teachers. And so that was basically an agreement that we really tried to work out. AVID is expensive going to some of the various locations. Luckily, by some of the work that our schools that are going through the AVID program currently, and by some work by President Godwin, the CEO of AVID came and ultimately loved what we were doing, and so requested that we try to get path training here, which basically means that we have training within the district.
And I just want to be clear, I very much support AVID 100%. What I would like to see is if we could use foundation funding instead of general funds for the expenses that are one-time expenses, not for ongoing expenses. Yeah.
AVID to our teams, Kirkwood, as he stated, used some CEIS dollars, which is attached back to IDEA Part B, to do some initial training. Those training opportunities were only out of state. So that first summer where the Kirkwood principal, IDS, and 3 teachers went, we were sending them out of state. This tonight that you see in front of you is approximately 40 teachers going to be trained in district. We're actually able to get the trainer to come here, so we're not paying those out-of-state expenses. We feel like this is a huge win for us. Fast forward, then last summer, we sent some Weber teachers, Northwest Junior High teachers. So this is really our ability to have 4 elementary buildings. Over the course of those 4 elementary buildings, 40 additional people are trained. So we're excited about that. Title II, CEIS, we haven't touched general fund for that. I did share with some of you earlier that I've asked that there is a recurring cost to AVID, so you can have online access to their teaching materials. That's roughly around $2,700, if I remember right. So that's the piece where, as we continue to expand and go out to buildings, that we want to be able to have
some way else to fund that, and that's why we've gone to the foundation and started talking to Susan Brennan about that.
Yeah, and I attended the Avid Spotlight, and it was terrific, and I'm very excited about what's happening at Kirkwood with Avid, so I appreciate you expanding it to the other schools. Definitely, thank you.
And we identified this as a need for the foundation as they were going through their strategic planning process. We've got a meeting already scheduled with them next week to talk about how this fits into their fundraising structure.
That's good. Yeah, I think we could get some folks in the community really excited about this. The results that we're seeing at Kirkwood, if we kind of cheerlead ourselves out there, I think we really could get some people that would want to donate to the foundation for this specifically.
And, you know, as a parent of a student in an Avid school, I too really love it. I think it's going to do a lot of great things, especially for those kids, you know, who don't have that experience at home of parents who have gone to college. You know, that's really what it's targeting. And I'll tell you, as far as the training goes, you know, I was there when they rolled it out before my daughter went to kindergarten. And that's a big piece of a lot of these programs, whether we're talking about restorative justice in circles or Avid. You know, you go to those trainings and, you know, you really get this sense and this passion for the work. And then that becomes infectious with the rest of the staff, because no matter how good the program is, it's really about the people who are delivering it, I believe. And so I'm excited that it's expanding. Yeah, it would be nice to find some ways, get some more community investment, because it's, I think we're going to see some big impact.
So I move that we approve the Avid agreement.
Second.
Okay, ready to vote?
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
Thank you. Public hearing, City High School Health Clinic.
Now is the time and place for the public hearing on the proposed plans and specifications for the City High School Health Clinic project. The Board of Directors set the date for this public hearing on April 24th, 2018. Notice of public hearing was published in the Iowa City Press Citizen on April 25th, 2018. The district will receive bids on this project at 2 p.m. on May 11th, 2018, at the physical plant located at 1137 South Riverside Drive, Iowa City, Iowa, 52246. Notice to contractors was published as required by law in multiple statewide plan rooms and on the Iowa City Community School District website on April 25th, 2018. Are there any questions from the board? Are there any questions from the public? I declare this public hearing closed.
Thank you. Now into the presentation section, which is a robust one this evening. We'll start with the annual Student Climate Survey Report.
So while Sarah's coming up, I'll be handing out some documents after I make a brief statement. Again, I just want to thank Dr. Brooke for the work that she's done and their team as far as kind of providing this information to us. It really, again, gives us another data point in which to assess students. I do want to say, I know we're on limited time, but I don't necessarily know that I get enough time to talk about some of these concerning issues when we talk about equity. I can tell you I'm concerned. And generally, I'm concerned not necessarily just about the student climate survey data, but just our general deliberation when it comes to equity issues. When we see data that shows us something different, then we believe we make it a different issue. We make it about a different issue. I've seen coded language being used when we're talking about our black and brown students. I've seen discipline disparities that we consistently talk about, blaming the kids, or what are the kids doing, or why aren't the parents involved. And that's concerning to me because, again, I frequently think about my own self-reflection and the work that I do, but when we talk about our own cultural competency and implicit bias, a lot of that is focused on self-reflection and what we can do better. I can tell you there are schools across the country that have done this work, that have done it the right way, and have worked on that self-reflection and been able to see huge changes within their data. I humbly request that you review the information that you've received, listen to the presentation from Dr. Brooke. I request that you ask questions about the data and look beyond your own perspective and the perspective of others. We were at just a recent education committee meeting where you had a number of LGBTQ students speak to you about the issues that were happening, not only as it pertains to bullying and harassment, but also what's happening in the classroom, also what's happening outside the classroom. and other things as far as not being involved. I can tell you again, when we have these conversations, and I can bring up a number of different movies, videos, when these conversations were happening about race and still happen about race, again, these are the concerns that come up. It's something different. It's something about this. It's something about that. I just urge you to ask those questions. And I agree, it's a heart and mind issue, and I want us to focus on that because I think that if we really focused on looking into our heart and mind and reflecting on what we're doing, I think we can change a lot of the situations for our kids. And so, again, Dr. Bruck is going to share some information with you related to this information. While there's been some successes, there have also been some things that we need to work on and continue to work on. And I appreciate the steps our admin team and teachers and administrators across our district have done in that way.
So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you guys or present to you this evening. So a couple of things. One, many of you know that the school climate survey is just one piece of what the Equity Implemented Partnership does with the school district here. A very important piece of what we do is sort of the beginning of each of our year, if you will, in terms of the process that we go through, and I'll touch on that sort of at the end. So what I'm going to share with you today is the responses from a student survey. It's our third year of doing this. The response rate this year was 79% overall, and that's a little over 6,500 students. So it's quite a few students in terms of hearing the voices of students in your schools. Today, given time limitations, I'm only going to show you a couple of key results from three of the main areas of the survey: the teacher and mentor relationships, inclusive classroom environments, and inclusive school environments. One of the things that I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on some of the district averages and the trends or changes over time, given the lack of time that I have with you today. I am happy to answer questions in the Q&A period about any disparities or differences across groups or across school types, elementary, junior high, high school. And I also will point your attention to the fact that this year, one of the things that we added was not only being able to tell you about differences by racial or gender identity, sexual orientation, or parents' level of education, but also ELL status, IEP status, free and reduced price lunch status, and advanced learner status. The other thing I will tell you, in case any of you are curious already and want to play on your iPads and your computers in front of you while I talk, is we have an interactive graph, as we did last year, that you can look up any single item or any composite score and see what the differences are across all of these different groups and over time when it's available. So with that, I'll get started. So the first thing I'm going to show you here is for teacher and mentor relationships. On the left-hand side, these are the overall averages for the last 3 years for all of the measures that we look at. They're composites, meaning they're made up of multiple survey items averaged together. What you can see here is for the last 3 years, a lot of the things went up for teacher relationships from 2016 to 17, and then went down a little bit from 17 to 18. One thing that I do want you to keep in mind is anytime you look at 3-year trends is that the sample from the first year that we did the survey in 2015 and 16 was only 6th, 8th, and 11th graders. So you need to take with a grain of salt or sort of some caution any 3-year trends that you look at. The trends that you really would want to pay more attention to are 2017 to 2018. Those are both years where it was 5th through 12th graders that took the survey, and so the samples are more comparable. So although all aspects of teacher relationships went down from last year to this year, on a more positive note, one of the things that we saw was all aspects of mentor relationships going up. So what you can see on the right-hand side there is the presence of mentors in schools, teachers being identified as mentors from students, gender-matched mentors and race-matched mentors all going up across the district. Oh, one of the things that I can also share with you guys that's an added value from this year's survey is that we had an open-ended response survey item at the end of the survey that students could type in any comments or things that they wanted to tell us about the survey or about school climate. And so I've just pulled out a couple of illustrative quotes that sort of help to give some student voice behind many of these numbers for each of the slides that I'll show you. So first, teacher relationships. One student said, "The teachers at this school do a good job at making sure students have a good learning environment that is safe and accepting of all people." On the other hand, another student shared with us, "I feel like my teachers treat me badly." Moving on to inclusive classrooms, I'm showing you two things about this. One is inclusive discussions, and the other is about classroom membership and perceptions that you are unable to share in class due to your race and gender. So What you can see on the left-hand side here, the top graph is showing you the percent of students that say, yes, I agree. There are opportunities to talk about race. The ability stands for differences in learning or physical abilities, sexual orientation, and gender identity. So you can see overall relatively high percentages of students saying there are opportunities to talk about these things in class. What you can see on the bottom is the changes over time for the 3 that have been asked for the last 2 years. Abilities, this is the first year that we asked that item, so there's no overtime trend. But overall, you can see that there are increasing percentages from last year to this year across the 3 that we asked: race, gender, and sexual orientation. So that's positive, increasing opportunities to talk about social difference or social issues in general. On the right-hand side, I'm showing you 2 graphs. The top one is the percent of students saying, yes, I feel like I'm a valued member of the classroom. I feel that my contributions in the classroom are valued. That's our measure of classroom membership. You can see that it went down this year from last year. And then on the bottom right-hand side, you can see 2 graphs, one that's showing you the percent of students that say, I feel unable to share in class due to my gender, and one that's showing you the percentage of students saying, I feel unable to share due to my race. And you can see that both of those have gone up. So while on the one hand, you see an increase in the students saying there are opportunities to talk about social differences and social issues, you also see a decline in people saying that they feel, students saying they feel like they're members of the classroom, or that unfortunately larger percentages of students are saying they feel unable to share. So in terms of inclusive discussions, one of the quotes I think that illustrates some of the concerns of students is, the only day teachers really talked about race, gender identity, sexual orientation, or other social issues was the Friday before Martin Luther King Day. Another student tells us, I think the teachers need to recognize the fact that uncomfortable discussion is some of the most productive discussion. If you only ever talk about subjects that don't challenge students' ideas and open their eyes to new concepts, then the discussion is not important. It's vital that we recognize that we must talk about things that make us uncomfortable in order to effectively cause change and educate. This graph, or this slide, is showing you on the one hand rates of bullying and harassment and intimidation, and then on the right-hand side the measures that we have that capture responsiveness to different types of things that happen in the school environment, including bullying and harassment. So on the left-hand side here, you can see these are the percent of students that say bullying or harassment or intimidation happens at my school on this basis. It is not the percent of students that say, I have personally experienced bullying or harassment on this basis. These are the percent of students saying, at my school, students are bullied, harassed, or intimidated on this basis. So what you can see is the highest rate of bullying and harassment as reported by students is for appearance-based reasons. The next is poverty or income-related things, followed by race, gender, disability, sexual orientation, immigrant status, religion, and then other reasons. Overall, these are relatively high percentages of students, especially for the top 3 or 4 categories being, somewhere hovering around 50%. So those are pretty high. If you look at the responsiveness questions we ask for, some of these are about what teachers are doing and some of them are about what students are doing. So you can see the top one that has the highest percentage, 87%, is the number of students or the percent of students saying, yes, I agree, that teachers make it clear that bullying is not allowed. So that's good. That's really high. Aim for 100%, but relatively high. The next is the school would take appropriate action if an incident was reported to them. Again, relatively high, 82%. A little bit of a decline here. If you tell a teacher that you've been bullied, the teacher will do something to help, 78%. The last one that you can see is substantially lower is students at your school try to stop bullying when they see it happening. So only 62% of students are saying they agree with that statement. So you can see that that's clearly the lowest rate in terms of all 4 of the responsiveness questions. In terms of bullying and harassment, a couple of the quotes from the students' survey. One says, personally, I've never been bullied, but I have seen it before and the teacher solved it. Another student, however, says, teachers act like the school is perfect and completely ignore the big things and think putting away our phones is going to magically solve fights and incidences. Some teachers do need to wake up and live up to what they say they're going to do when something happens. This slide shows you a couple of things. On the left-hand side, it shows you what we think of as diversity and inclusion values, and I'll walk you through some of the questions. And then on the right-hand side, it's hurtful comments, hearing hurtful comments from teachers and students. So on the left-hand side here, we asked several questions about values that the students either hold themselves or think that their school embraces and values. The first one is asking whether or not the student thinks that discriminating against people that are different than them is wrong. So 94% are saying yes, it's wrong to discriminate against people, so that's good, a high value in terms of saying that that's wrong. Equity, inclusiveness, and diversity are important at my school. 91% of students are saying yes, I agree with that statement. Adults in this school respect each other's differences. 91% say yes. I am accepting of students that are different than me. 91, again, very high. The lowest one here is whether or not students are reporting that students at my school respect each other's differences. So similar to what we saw on the last slide with students being the lowest, again, here we see the students talking about their other students or reporting on students in their own school being the lowest. Below that, I show you some of the good news, which is that the two items that we asked last year, the one about diversity, inclusiveness, and equity are important in my school, went up from last year to this year, as did the percent of students saying that students respect each other's difference. So that's good news in terms of both of those going up. On the right-hand side, this will show this this graph shows you the overtime trend for the last 3 years, because we've asked the same questions for 3 years about hearing hurtful comments from teachers and then hearing hurtful comments from students. So the top half, the yellow ones, are hearing hurtful comments from students. What you can see are all the lines are going up quite dramatically from last year to this year. So that means there's a very high increase from last year to this year in students reporting hearing hurtful comments from other students on the basis of race, sexual orientation, gender identity, religious identity, and immigrant status. What you can see on the bottom, the gray, is the same questions from teachers. You can see that they all go up, but they all go up slightly. So in relative comparison, they are going up, so that's not good, but they're going up much less quickly than the ones from students. In terms of some hurtful comments, quotes from the survey, one student says, "Kids in school constantly say things like race and sexual orientation-based derogatory terms in negative connotation, making racial jokes, lots of racial slurs, etc. It happens all the time." Another student says, "This particular educator has said many hurtful comments about race and sexist comments about women, and I don't feel comfortable with him, and I'm not learning very much from him." I was going to share another one with you about the dress code and whether or not teachers are making comments about what girls should or shouldn't wear, but that's already been covered by some students in person, so I won't read a quote about that one. So in my short amount of time, I just tried to give you a sliver or a slice of some of the things that you can learn from this data. I think there's a couple of key takeaway points. One, this kind of data really can provide insight into student experiences. The benefit of having a survey that's taken by a very high percentage of students in your district is that you can capture the broad patterns and sort of systematic differences and trends over time, more so than you can from the voices of just individual students. It helps to see where some of those individual students that come before you are representing a broader pattern or a large group of students. So a couple of the key takeaways in terms of actual findings from this year's survey. As I showed you, some of the areas that we've been tracking over time have increased or gotten better, while other ones have declined or gotten worse. One of the things that we find that I'm not able to share with you today, but I'm happy to talk with you about, is we do see very consistent patterns across all 3 years in terms of racial differences or racial disparities in a lot of the areas. Another pattern that we find pretty systematically in many of the areas is that elementary schools are higher or have better experiences than many of the secondaries. Sometimes it's junior highs, sometimes it's high schools that are the lowest, but on average across lots of the areas, elementary schools tend to be doing better in terms of school climate and student experiences. Another thing that we find is that disparities between LGB and non-LGB students continue to persist. However, there are a couple areas where these disparities have declined, and there are also a few areas where disparities or differences between students whose parents have different levels of education have declined. So that's also a positive story. So the other key takeaways here, I think, is one, to understand that this data not only shows you the patterns and sort of trends in what's going on from the student's perspective, but it's about how you can use the data to help yourself inform some of the planning that you do here at the district level, and also that the schools can use in terms of their own planning for their CSIP goals in the future. This data is also really rich and is able to track progress over time in things that we're evaluating. One of the things that we're evaluating is the implicit bias training. Just to remind you, since many of you were not board members, although I'm sure you were actively involved in listening to every conversation that happened at this board table, this implicit bias training came out of a year-long process that we looked at the data, identified key focus areas, and said, this is one of the areas that we need to focus on, brought together a multi-stakeholder task force that included parents, teachers, community members, and students themselves to have an ongoing conversation over a series of meetings in the fall. And the implicit bias training was one of the 3 top recommendations of that task force. Along with that was one of the other recommendations was restorative justice practices, which we've heard a lot about tonight. As many of you know, we started a restorative justice pilot program in a couple of the schools following that recommendation from that key stakeholder task force. What the Equity Implemented Partnership is doing is a second-year evaluation of both of those programs. This year, we've expanded the restorative justice evaluation to be of all schools because what we found is that many schools are trying restorative practices, and so what we want to be able to do is track whether or not schools that are using more restorative practices, as reported by the teachers themselves, are actually doing better on either the student climate survey in terms of different disciplinary dimensions, equity, consistency, strictness, transparency, responsiveness, but also whether or not we're seeing declines in the use or rate of suspensions and other exclusionary discipline or punishment-based discipline approaches, and also the disparities in those. So that's something that we'll be able to share with you this summer, both the restorative justice and implicit bias evaluations using both the teacher and student survey data. So as many of you know, the teachers are also given a survey, and we have items on that, some of which match the students and some of which help us to evaluate these programs. So that's the last key takeaway in terms of using this data to evaluate the progress that is being made in the district for some of the key equity initiatives. The last, in terms of next steps, we'll do this again where we identify key focus areas and groups. So we've done this 2 years. I told you just about the first one. The second one was the LGBT student focus. And I would remind you that the recommendations that came out of that second multi-stakeholder task force was not only to make a public statement, which you all made, but also we had 4 strategies that the multi-stakeholder task force came up with that were had recommendations behind them. One was to change the curriculum to be more inclusive. One was to increase the inclusiveness of the school environment, including anti-bullying and harassment policies, making gender-inclusive bathrooms more accessible, things like that. The other was supporting the students directly and supporting student groups such as the GSAs directly. So I would advise other people to look at the full report to see what it is that you all are following in terms of your recommendations and how you're following a year-long process that has data-driven, evidence-based, and also community input-based sort of moving forward. So with that, I think I'll take questions.
I have a question maybe more for Kingsley. The bullying and harassment part, and it was like slide 5 has the data on there. So the stuff that's reported in there, have you looked at that and maybe compared it to what's actually reported? Like, I think when I read this, it's what students are saying they reported, but like what's actually been reported? Is there, you know what I'm saying?
There's some correlation. I mean, most of the time we review that data at the end of the year, and so we'll look at our 2017-18 data and then look at this information that's been provided and then see what correlation there may be. But in general, I just went off of the 2016-17 data in our prior years, and I would say that some things match up. Appearance is one of the things that in general I would say may not necessarily get coded as bullying harassment, could just be coded as just general behavior or whatever the case may be. But I would say that the things that I see on the student climate survey do somewhat align with the complaints that we see.
And how about the implementation of the anonymous tip line? Have you seen an increase, or can you tell us what kind of numbers you see on that?
So we've seen, as far as in relation to this information as well.
Well, I go back to like maybe the question was like sometimes maybe people don't feel like anything was done, but if it's done anonymously, then they may never know that.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the concerns that we had with the information. And ultimately, we wanted to make it anonymous so people felt comfortable providing the information in general. I would say, though, that, that particular comment is tough because we have certain guidelines where we can't share information with students, with parents, and, part of me thinks that particular concern speaks to us following our FERPA guidelines that we're supposed to follow by federal law. But in general, again, those are some of the concerns we're trying to figure out as far as, when somebody reports anonymously that something happened in X, Y, Z hallway, how do we, if we don't necessarily know the student that reported it, how do we move supervision over there to provide for a more safe environment? What else can we do? And so those are some of the conversations that we're going to have, especially as we close the year, I guess, of our bullying, harassment, texting code, anonymous reporting feature to see what changes we can make and use the dashboard to inform that information.
I was going to ask this question, but you said you'd get to it in the summer. I do want to know if how implicit bias training is doing. I mean, I've had anecdotal evidence from people who've said, career teachers who've said, I learned new things. I changed my mindset, and I do this differently now. And so I'd really like to see some data on folks who've been through that and how they, because this is still super concerning, and we have a ways to go. Any idea why we see the difference in elementary schools versus the secondaries, as far as there's a pretty dramatic, numbers are a lot different there. So what do you think that's coming from?
Should I answer your first part first?
Okay.
About implicit bias training?
Yeah.
So this summer, what you'll get from us is you'll get a 2-year evaluation. So we did a 1-year evaluation, and I'll sort of describe to you the kinds of data we use to evaluate it so you have a sense of what you'll see. First, we do pre- and post-assessments of teachers that are actively doing the training. So the pre-assessment happens before they do the training in most cases. That's the ideal. And the post-assessment happens after, at the end of the year. And so what you can learn from the pre- and post-assessment is you can look at the teachers who have been trained, whether or not they've changed over the course of the year. So the pre- and post-assessment has identical questions so that you can see at the beginning of the year versus the end of the year, can they identify what implicit bias is? Can they tell you different reasons for the achievement gap? Are they parent-based, school-based? Do they see the role of teachers in it? Things like that. We ask them almost 50 different questions on the pre- and post-assessment, so that's where you can see growth among the trained teachers. The other data that we use to assess the implicit bias training program is the end-of-the-year teacher survey that's given to all teachers and staff in the district. What we use that data for is we include some of the items that we have on the pre- and post-assessment so that we have a comparison group of teachers that have not been trained so that we can see where the teachers that have been trained are by the end of the year compared to teachers that have not gone through the training at all. And so that gives us a different lens again. And so that's the kind of data that you'll see in the implicit bias evaluation this summer. Differences between elementary and secondary. I think that one is tricky. The Iowa City School District is not unique in having greater school climate and more positive, inclusive school environments in elementary schools and more positive experiences for students in elementary schools. That's a trend nationwide. Different people have posited different things that are very broad structural reasons. Things like students spend most of their day with one teacher when they're in elementary school. When you move to secondary, you're moved across a lot of teachers. And one of the things that we know most influentially impacts students' experiences in a school is their relationships with teachers. And so if they have more fragmented relationships with multiple teachers, instead of one deep, lasting, strong relationship, a lot of times that's going to be a key sort of underlying more negative experiences in school. That's not the only thing, but that is a national sort of trend or national research is something that you would look for. The other thing I would say, though, is each year we do school profiles for each of the schools, and we show them both the student data for their school and also the teacher data for their school. And some of the items are complete matches between teachers and students. And one thing that we're able to do when we go out and do these presentations of their own data is help them to identify where areas that they want to focus on that year. Because I think one of the things that is important to remember is that you can make change both top down, but also bottom up. And sometimes the educators in the schools are the best people to look at the data and to be able to understand what's going on in their particular school. Because even though you do see lower levels for the secondary, there's differences across the secondary schools. And I think that that's something that needs to be taken into account.
Thank you.
Sorry. With the school profiles, how are our schools using that data to implement changes?
I can speak to it a little bit, and then Kingsley can take it away. Or maybe Kingsley can take it away.
So basically, we're using the information to, for our CSIP, our Comprehensive School Improvement Plans. We're using that to inform one particular goal that's focused on culture, but in general, one of the things that Sarah's talked about recently with our administrators is how culture can inform all of our goals. And so if students aren't feeling safe in a particular classroom, how are we expecting that we'll see growth from an academic, a math or a reading standpoint? And so we're really using that data to inform at each of our school levels what they're doing about climate and culture. In particular, this past year, we focused on schools value diversity, and we focused on
Students respecting each other's differences.
Students respecting each other's differences. And we put in, or basically each school put in action plans or put in steps to address what that would look like in their particular building and how they could improve and see growth at the Student Climate Survey data.
And I'm sorry, I'll let you, I just have one quick point of clarification. So the profiles are only shared with administrators of school or with the entire staff?
They're shared with the entire staff. So okay. Dr. Brooke, last year, probably September, October, and a little bit into November, or August, September, October, and a little bit into November, went out to all the schools to present on that information, and the same thing will happen this upcoming year as well.
In some of the secondaries, I presented only to the ILTs, so it's up to the schools themselves to distribute it to the staff outside of that. If all the elementary schools, I presented it to the entire faculty.
Our junior highs and high school have the option not to disperse that information on their own?
That's not a question for me.
Not necessarily. Again, they have to look at that information and inform their own CSIP, and so that data has to be regularly discussed and talked about within their either PLCs or staff meetings or whatever the case may be. So Sarah presented to their ILTs because they wanted to, because the information that came out at that time, we wanted to sit and kind of digest that information with our ILT and then talk about it with staff. And so I know there's a number of schools that did have that conversation and were able to incorporate with their CSIP.
The ILT is the Instructional Leadership Team, which is part of the Teacher Leadership Program.
The other thing I would say is last year when I went out to the schools is I encouraged them to use the data as Kingsley was mentioning, which is if you're thinking about tackling achievement gaps, say by race in third grade, you can look at the teacher relationship information about are your black and white students or your Hispanic students or whoever you have the lowest achievement from having differences in how they perceive academic support from teachers, because that would be a clear way to say, okay, they're perceiving less academic support from teachers. That would be a way that we could identify something specific that we could do, as opposed to just saying, we have an achievement gap. There's 100 things you could possibly try to do. And many of the schools in their CSIP planning came up with specific things that they wanted to focus on. And so one thing that we'll be able to do in the school profiles this year is say, okay, you focused on doing these 3 things. I could imagine that they would most directly affect academic support perceptions, teachers' respectful treatment, whatever it is that they really tried to focus on this year, and be able to show them whether or not their efforts paid off in what we're seeing in the data from both the students and the teachers' perspective on those issues. So I think that the data can be used to assess progress, both in terms of what's working and also what's not working. I mean, can it help schools to see that they are actually having success in some of the things that they're trying on their own?
No.
Yeah. And you described earlier, is it possible to go in and look at the data as in a comparison of a RAM versus a non-RAM school?
Not in the interactive graph, but yes, I mean, I could do that.
Okay, super. And, the junior high students seem to rate more issues worse. Junior high students report the lowest level of equitable treatment in 2017 and 2018. Junior high students are the least likely to report always feeling safe in the hallways, bathroom compared with elementary school students, and it's less than 40%. Why is that?
I think there's probably a lot of reasons why that is. I think you have to drill down to the individual school to try to understand some of them, but you also have to look across the data to see whether or not the same kinds of schools are reporting low on all dimensions. And there are a couple of fundamental ones that if a school or a type of school is low on them, especially the teacher relationship ones, you're probably going to see them lower on some of the other ones as well because they're very fundamental. Some of the other things that you'll see in terms of classroom content, those tend to fall on a different dimension. So even when you do not have strong relationships with teachers, you might still report that the content or materials are inclusive. So some of the things don't correlate as strongly with teacher relationships, but a lot of them do, especially the ones that you mentioned.
Would any of this be the result of our transporting kids an hour long or 2 hours a day on a bus?
We didn't see any students using the open-ended comment period to tell us that they were negatively experiencing transportation other than not in terms of the length. Some of the comments that we got were about the buses being chaotic or other things not being supervised on the bus in terms of hearing hurtful comments or being bullied, things like that.
Okay, and yeah, to that point, barriers to extracurricular activities. 20% cited transportation concerns for why they did not participate in extracurricular activities. Why were bus? Can we get anything out of there that why buses weren't utilized? 20% out of a high school with 372 at one of our graduation announcements. That's a football team, that's a basketball team, that's a marching band.
Mm-hmm. I'm really glad that you pointed out the extracurricular participation information. So one of the things that I think is even more startling than the statistics that you just reported is the students that are the least likely to say that they participated in, what are they called? Performing arts, which is the highest, the thing that the most students in this district participate in, and followed by athletics. So both of the most popular things for students to do, what's it called? So it's been a long evening. Performing arts or athletics. Students with free and reduced price lunch status are the least likely to say that they do either of those two things. And when you break down the reasons for the lack of participation, so we ask students, yes or no, did you do each of these different things? And then we also ask, so it's yes, no, or I was interested but I did not participate. When you select no, yes, I'm interested, but I did not participate, we ask you another series of questions, which is why did you not participate? And this is where the cost and things like that come in. So those free and reduced price lunch students that were the least likely to say they did performing arts or athletics participation, they were the most likely and had much higher rates saying that it was due to cost and transportation as the top two reasons why they did not participate. So if you think about informing planning or actionable things that the district could do, this data clearly shows that increasing access to these opportunities for low-income students would be supported by what we see.
Right. Transportation is a barrier to many things. And I also, the 9% of students that said school activities cost too much and that is why I did not participate, that's almost 10%. And there again, go to a school that has 400 kids. That's a chunk of students that aren't participating because they feel the cost of an activity is too expensive.
Yeah, well, 20% of free and reduced price lunch students say it was cost why they didn't participate. So that's 1 in 5. Yeah.
Right.
Worse.
Well, it's 9% of overall,
yeah.
But you're absolutely right. Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation. I think you get the last question, Lori.
Okay. First of all, I want to say thank you so much for the report. You guys always do such a good job of what you're doing. But but in addition, something I'd be interested in seeing if there's a way to work it in is I'd be interested in seeing results, the climate in classrooms where there's a teacher of color.
Mm-hmm.
And the only place you could really look at that would be elementary, because in junior high and high school, they have like 7 teachers, so it would be harder to measure that there. But at elementary, if there were a way that you could drill it even down to the classroom level, that would be really interesting data to have.
Yeah. We're able to look at the composition of both the students and the teachers in terms of their racial composition, and whether or not there's higher, lower things on the school climate survey from the students' perspective. We'll probably be able to share that sometime
So
this
you have
summer.
that data?
Yeah.
Oh, that would be great. That would be excellent.
Yeah.
I'd love to see that. Also, I really appreciate you adding the extracurricular piece to this year. That's very helpful. One thing that I asked for last year, and you told me that you were doing other things, and that's why you didn't add it in, or didn't keep it in, but I really liked that engagement in school piece that was in the 2016 report, feeling engaged in
the
this.
motivations for
Yes, motivation to participate in the classroom activities, that kind of thing. So just something to think about. If there's a way to add that back in, I'd love to see it. Thank you.
Every year we try to keep the survey at least just as long or slightly less long to reduce survey burden.
I did see the one comment from the student, the survey's too long. So I thought, well, yeah.
We're being honest. We're sharing our critical feedback that we get as well from the students with you all. But, I mean, to speak to your other point about teachers of color, I think the other thing that this data shows is if you look at the race and gender matched mentor rates, one of the things that we were able to look at this year is not just having a race matched mentor in general, but whether or not you have a race matched mentor that's a teacher versus another adult in the school versus a community person versus a club person. And what you see very strongly is that for white students, they have a race matched mentor across the board for all of these very high rates. What you see for African American, Latino, and Asian students, however, is that they have the least race-matched mentors when the mentor is a teacher. And then the way that they get race-matched mentors is from the community or club or other adults in the school. So that really speaks to the importance of having a diverse faculty.
Thank you so much. This was extremely, extremely well done, and your thoughtfulness and your responses, and Kingsley, you two are extremely helpful. So I would encourage us to use this data as we're planning our goals for next year so that we can intentionally put some actions in place as we typically do, I think, but just to continue to have that visibility of what we're doing and how some work may then manifest in the next year's survey. So thank you again very much.
Yeah, and I'd like to echo what Lori said. Thank you for all the hard work that you put in, and there's a lot of information in here, and I think it's something that at some point in time a broader discussion at a work session or something like that, if we could continue it. I think there's a lot of good stuff in here. Thank you.
Very good.
The last thing that Kingsley gave you guys is the sort of call-outs for the different student groups, the IEP versus non-IEP, the free and reduced price lunch versus not, the ELL versus not, and whatnot. Those are just significant differences for better or for worse. So you can kind of see the systematic nature of some of the differences across student groups.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Next up, annual affirmative action equity report.
So I didn't plan on presenting, but you had any questions regarding the data? I wanted to open it up. I didn't plan on presenting, but if you have any questions regarding the information I shared, I can open it up. Yeah. Go ahead.
And I have to apologize to Kingsley. I sent him questions last night, I think it was. And so he's working on getting that, and I'm assuming you'll send them to me as well as the rest of the board. So
Correct.
There was just some questions that in reviewing the climate study report, I didn't get to his report until late. So I do apologize for springing that on you at the last minute.
No, it's okay. I mean, with these two topics, there's a ton of information. I mean, it's really tough to kind of get in a finite amount of time, especially in regards to data. So we'll continue work on that and get it to you as soon as possible.
Other questions?
Yeah, and we've discussed this issue quite a bit, and that. Can you give us some ideas on we've talked about having a short list of staff. We had another U of I person come in and talk about what to look for in helping to diversify your staff, and that's someone that knows the community and those things. Are we utilizing that advice we're getting from the U, and are we doing everything that, I mean, we have people in positions that can be promoted, and we have substitute teachers that have worked for us for years. That would be ideal. You know, we've test drove them. We know they've been in with students. They've been doing it. They interview for jobs. They don't get hired. What can we do to help increase our candidate pool and make sure that we're getting the diverse staff and administration that we want?
So one of the things that Director Hemway is mentioning or discussing is our previous conversation as it pertained to, I can't remember the doctor's name at the moment, but she came and reported on recruitment and retention.
Christine Grant.
Christine Grant, Dr. Grant, talking about retention and some of the work that she had done with not only teachers of color in our district, but in other districts throughout the corridor, and some of the things that she was seeing. To answer your question in kind of a broad way, and then if we want to have another conversation in more detail, you know, that's kind of the moving forward I feel like we need to do with the equity plan. And so ultimately, 3 years ago, we put forward an equity plan to look at some of these disparities. As you can see from the data, we've made some huge achievements in that area, but obviously we can do more. Some of the things that I've spent a lot of time researching, as well as working with Cersei Stumble, working with Dr. Bruck, and others, is how we focus on, you know, looking at training people that are going to participate in interviews. What can we do to ensure that across the system that we are making sure that our candidates of color know about how to navigate that particular system. I mean, I can tell you, not necessarily for candidates of color, but in general, we have some candidates that, you know, don't submit an application. That one step that, you know, is a concern when we're focusing on getting candidates for different positions. And so we'll be working on that this summer to get that information to you. But I think the best way to answer that question is to say, again, update the equity plan, put together that plan, have that conversation with the rest of our team to move that conversation forward and see some of those changes. And we have put a plan together. We've been able to see some of that change. And so that's how I would respond to that.
Well, like I say, you know, as a community member, I came to these meetings for 6 years, and it was always a priority to increase participation and everything like that. As a board member for 2 years, I've been here and everything like that. And you know, if it's a type of thing where we got to grow our own in the teaching staff and offer students a scholarship or something like that, then let's get on with it and do that, because it seems like we're talking about the same thing year after year, and we're not making any real significant progress.
Well, and we have a real problem with retention, you know, and I think about recruiting minority teachers to come here. What's the incentive? I mean, it really feels like a hostile environment, right? It doesn't, I mean, if you look at some of these numbers, some of our schools is 0%, 3, 4, 5%. It just doesn't feel like a place that would draw someone. I think, so growing our own, I think, is critical. People who already live in this area, they know what Iowa is like. You know, they're not coming in from a coast where it's a very different culture. But Phil's right. I mean, we talk and talk. We've made some gains in administrators. Teachers is just flat. Support staff are making some gains, but I think I'm feeling the urgency. I mean, Kirkwood's done a fantastic job. And maybe, you know, we start looking at these buildings where we have a little bit and start growing those folks into administrative positions. Administrators may have more, you know, are going to hire other folks of color, that there's things going on there that, you know, for whatever reason, if it's implicit bias, that we're just not getting folks in the door. And I don't, I think about this, and people say, oh, you know, go to Chicago and find some people. And how do you sell Iowa City if you say, well, you know, you come here and we won't really support you, we won't really show you what to do. You may have staff that, you know, kind of rebel against you. So come to this district. You know, we're really going to be welcoming. And I think people come here, they look at Iowa City, they look at some surfacey things, they say, oh, this looks good. And they get here and their experiences is, no, thank you. You talk the talk, but you do not walk the walk. And I'm really can't emphasize enough that we got to be walking this walk, and these numbers have to change. I don't know what we need to do. That's you guys' job to figure out. But if they don't change, we have to get to a tipping point, or people are not going to see this as an attractive place for people of color or people, any kind of minority. And we, we have a lot of power in this district to shape our kids and to help them learn. And we know from all of our own data, that the impact of having someone who you can recognize and see yourself in the classroom is one of the most powerful things we can do to boost achievement, to have kids feel safe. And so I'm just frustrated that this feels very flat and that the urgency isn't there to make these changes, get folks in place, and support them when they're here. Because I don't think we see that all the time. And so I just wanted to register my strong feelings about it.
I echo much of what JP just said. From 2016 to 17, we were essentially flat across all three categories. And then the goal for 2018-19, especially for teachers, we're saying we're going to more than double our teacher populations. And I need to see some specific activities that we're doing that's going to drive that level of increase, and I haven't quite heard that yet. And then to JP's point, if we can recruit, can we retain and create that culture that is inclusive and supporting and in different ways perhaps than what we've done to date, because clearly it's not getting us to where we need to be. So we don't have to go into it a ton tonight, but I'm super worried about this goal we've established for 2018-19 for more than doubling the non-white teachers in our district, because we've never seen that kind of growth before.
Right, and that's the goal. And I mean, I would again hearken you back to the presentation we gave in regards to diverse hiring, because I did specifically outline certain strategies. Those haven't been vetted, those haven't gone through kind of public committee review and everything else. But those are the things that can work and hopefully change the numbers. I would tell you that, to that extent, I understand that there's urgency. I mean, that's part of my day and nightly job. And I can tell you that other districts are looking at our district and saying, what are you doing differently? Because they're having the same conversations and wanting to see the same numbers that we're seeing. Because I think we are doing some things differently, some other districts, even some of the bigger districts. I would also tell you, though, in general, and especially going to your comment about whether or not we support the work, I do think we're coming to a tipping point. I do think you can only train so much on awareness, and there's going to be some tough conversations, not just for us, but for the board as well. And I think that's where, as far as from your role or where you sit, that's where we need to support the most. When we start to, really have those trainings and push people on their implicit bias around the interview processes and other things, you're going to have some people that come before the board and say, we don't like this. I don't want to do this and other things. And that's where, again, I would appreciate that support to move forward in this way, because it has been building. And I would tell you, and I tell the equity committee as well, I know it. I used to when I first got here, I was saying, immediately everything will change. I'll just change this law, this policy, and then we'll have it right away. And it didn't work like that. In order to do it right and build it systemically over time, it's taken a lot more to do that work. But I do think we're at a good point, and I do think we're at a tipping point. And so there's some excitedness about that, but also some reservation as far as, how do we make sure we're supportive, not only from the board standpoint, but across the district as well.
I got a quick one. I don't want to minimize the conversation that just happened, but I'm just looking at the one graph that has 4% male teachers and 96% female, and I feel like it has to be wrong, because that number is just really small. And if we're going to talk about having a teacher that looks like you, there's half your population that doesn't have a teacher that looks like them. So do we have anything in place to attract more male teachers?
So yeah, that's one of the major concerns. Sorry, I'm trying to pull it up so everybody else can see it. That's one of the concerns that we view in general, especially as you kind of relate it back to the student climate survey information as well. Not only race-matched mentors, but having mentors that, are male in that particular sense. It's tough in the same sense of, I would tell you that it's even tougher to find a black male teacher. I think that whenever that happens, we try to make sure that we focus on and hire them as soon as possible. But again, yeah, I mean, the data is what the data is. I mean, I think in general, when you look at the education profession, you see deficiencies in regards to male, and obviously when we talk about racial and ethnic teachers of color as well. And so I think that's that's the reality. I mean, our data looks like what the national data looks like, and we have to do a better job. And so that is a key component. I didn't share the entire plan that I gave you a presentation for last year, but it is a key component that's expressed in our affirmative action equal opportunity plan. So we do look at that, and we do have those conversations.
I just, if that's what you see, we're perpetuating that stereotype that it's a women's job to be a teacher, and that's just simply not true. But if from, a young age, that's what kids are seeing, I think it gets in their head whether you're saying it to them or not. So I think both, a good spread of, male and female teachers and making sure we increase our minority teachers. I think both those things together are important. So I don't want to minimize one over the other, but I don't want to forget that one, because that graph is kind of startling when I look at it.
Yep.
Well, in the same sense, I would say that, in general, you would see more male administrators across from a national average. We would see that probably being more 65, 35 in that sense, but we consistently look at making sure that we are not on that side of following the national average when it pertains to that. And so there are, as you look at different levels, and that's what I tried to share in that plan, and I can send it to the board again, as you look at different levels, you can also see the lack of diversity in, upper management positions, counselors, secretaries. There's other things that we look at that we want to specifically focus on and see what we can do from an action plan standpoint.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you all. Thanks, Kingsley. Craig?
We have an equally stimulating report that we spent a lot of time on, and I'll have Leslie highlight some of the things in this third quarter.
In the quarterly report, just the things we would like to highlight is we updated the expenditures to reflect our estimate for the 17-18 complete year. A couple things that are of note there is the facility master plan and the Liberty staffing was higher than what we had projected before, but that was offset a little bit by this SBRC approval that you approved back in, I believe it was February now. And so there is a little bit of an offset there, and you see that on page 10. Utilities are up. We budgeted the right number, but when you compare the expenditures from year over year growth, expenditures are up over $300,000 compared to last year. Now, Liberty is a big chunk of that, obviously, but we also did experience a colder and longer winter, and so that's impacted us there. And so that's just something that we can't control from year to year. If we could, we would. If you can, JP, go ahead. And we've also updated all the SBRC actions, like I indicated, to impact our budget authority on page 10. That's our primary page. The legislative session recently concluded, and we have not factored in any of their decisions on that. It's too early to tell. I mean, there's lots of guesses as to what the tax implications might be moving forward. We have not had any information come forward to us from the statewide level that would help us out with that. So as those come about, it'll probably be next fall before Craig and I are able to put those together into where we're looking for future years going forward. Would remind you that we will have at the next meeting the approval of a sale of SAVE bonds. We shared that with you previously, but just a reminder on that. The dashboards on pages 4 and 5 have been updated with the most current information, mostly June of 2017. If it's fiscal data, if it's information for 17-18 that's available, it has been updated as well. So overall, the fiscal year unspent balance is estimated to be down about $500,000 from where we came to you with the December report, which would have been the first meeting in February. And the next 2 years then are trending down, which is also consistent with what we shared with you. And so those will be very, very tight budget years as we move forward. And you can see the trend for the unspent balance. We are on a downward trend. And so we are going to be needing to carefully monitor programming changes, adjustments that we make, as well as impact to our budget in terms of staffing and other items that we can control.
Questions for Leslie? I think we're good. Thank you so much for that update.
Yeah, very thorough.
We'll move on to annual asset protection report. Is that also Leslie?
Yes, it is. This is a report that we do annually, as you indicated, Janet. It provides to you information about the coverages that we're required to carry on the district, both from a property and liability as well as a workers' comp. And so it includes all of that, as well as we have a little bit of information about our health and dental benefits to our staff, so that they're an asset, as we all know as well, so we want to make sure that they're covered. A couple things of note is and Adam goes a long way in this, is identifying that our cyber coverage was not adequate. The level that the two primary coverages in the state of Iowa provided was $1 million of cyber coverage. That's clearly not enough. And so our pool that we are a member of went a blanket increase to $2 million for all member schools, with the individual district option to go to $5 million, which we have opted to do. The cost is very, very cheap to go that much higher and provide that protection for that. Also not included in this presentation is the executive committee of the IPSIP pool approved a violent and malicious acts coverage last Wednesday. What that does is that would provide coverage to any district or organization of a malicious act. So it's not just a shooter. It's what happened in Toronto with somebody driving through a parking lot and trying to take out a group of people. What this covers is it covers the damages or the actions that you have to take after that. So if you remember Sandy Hook, they had to repurpose that classroom and take it out of commission and rent space and those type of things. It would cover all of those expenses that you wouldn't have from terrorist-related items that are oftentimes not covered or excluded from your coverage. So those are all included. A couple emerging risks that districts have that our pool provides coverage for does include cyber, like I mentioned. Concussions are covered in terms of that, and there's recent legislative changes, so the protocols have to be followed. Obviously, you can't be negligent in your actions, but it does include that. Some policies do exclude that. It includes copyright infringement. You may have heard the story of a Dr. Bell sending out emails to organizations and saying, a coach has been using a motivational phrase in a tweet or whatever. For example, I have a dream is the one that gets mentioned the most often, having a copyright and wanting to assess damages on the district because of a coach or a teacher using that to motivate students. Seems a little absurd, but it's out there. It's being done all over the country. Our pool also includes armed staff. A completely different discussion, but the other major coverage provider in the state of Iowa has on record of excluding any district with armed staff in both Kansas and California, and their Kansas program is almost nearly identical to the Iowa program, so you could anticipate that may be applied here if it ever comes to a further discussion. And playground liability, and that one's not that we don't have liability. It covers those situations where if a child falls while they're on the playground and the staff person who's supervising helps the student up, looks them over and says, "I think you're okay." The student continues to play, goes home that night, has the reoccurring pain, is diagnosed with a broken arm. They're going to come back against the district because we didn't take appropriate action. We have coverage from a liability perspective for that type of action where the person prudent. So those are just a couple things to highlight our coverage. It's very strong coverage. We're looking to grow the pool even more than the current 25 districts this year, and some of these enhancements will provide coverage that far exceeds those that are available to other school districts. So entertain any questions on that report.
To that, you were talking about the playground scenario. Going around and looking at the new playground at Alexander, the very first structure by the automated gate, there's a little sign there that says, if I'm remembering it correctly, it's adult supervision required. And at the other ones, it says adult supervision is recommended. Now, are we at risk with any liability concerns by that statement being on that playground sign?
Well, the signs probably aren't going to cover you either way. We're going to be named in a lawsuit if somebody's hurt at a school district because of the deep pockets approach. So yes, we can take a look at that and see if there shouldn't be consistency on the signs, but it's, prudent actions would say you should always have supervision, whether it's recommended or suggested.
I agree, but the one specifically states adult supervision required.
It's probably not going to change it in the court of.
Okay.
Any further questions? Thank you, Leslie. Annual sustainability report. Dwayne or Dave?
Thank you. We're going to defer that to Dave McKenzie. He's going to get that report.
Okay, thank you.
I've volunteered. So just three quick highlights here. The first one is we thought a pretty good success story. Started out as a very modest project to install water bottle fillers on drinking fountains with the target of 1 per school. And they were received so positively. There was such a great demand for them that we've got 89 of them out there now. And in just a few years, we've reached a total of 1.5 million bottles filled, or potential plastic bottles that we've avoided producing as waste. So that was a pretty neat project that was initiated by our 2 district plumbers, Dave Hansen and Heather Grau. So. Point 2, just a quick note on solar so far. We do have 1 solar project in the design stages planned for a Liberty High Phase 2. It's a small school bus utility building that'll be 100% solar when it starts up. And we're continuing to talk to vendors and installers about solar, but that's the only thing we have planned at the moment. And finally, every list, every sustainability list that you look at talks about pollution prevention, and some of them actually mention integrated pest management directly. So just wanted to mention another advantage to our IPM program besides student and staff health and safety is also it contributes to our sustainability goals.
Yeah, I just had, since the young gentleman from Southeast Junior High did their plug for solar energy, I mean, are we looking at that, at what kind of cost savings we could gain at, the cost has come down quite a lot in the past decade.
That's true. I wouldn't say that we've been going after the low-hanging fruit because some of our projects have been pretty expensive. But what's been focused on so far is trying to reduce our operating costs through usage. And so our main projects in the building renovations have been lighting upgrades and HVAC improvements, usually with geothermal. So it's not only reducing electricity, but also gas usage. And we're getting some really tremendous savings with that with less investment than is required if you're buying the solar equipment. Now I realize that, leasing equipment is an option and we are looking at that, but we've been focusing on these other projects so far.
I just wonder if there's any synergy with things that the county is doing, if we could get, if we could realize a massive, something big, that might be one area where we can get back some of this money, because we can't control the weather and we can't control the energy costs. We're not going to control the cost of oil. So anywhere, we're going to have some tight budget years, and I think we need to be looking at anywhere we can to find any savings that we can find in where we can control it.
Agree.
Yeah, that'd be a good one for us to take up in operations and discuss. There have been some discussions about solar in the past, just a review of that at the time. At that time, the biggest incentive was a tax rebate that way, and that's not really, it doesn't excite us, but as you cited, the young gentleman had a financial plan to get investors to do that,
Right,
and
right.
gosh, our ears are wide open to new ideas and everything on that, and I think that's something we can take up in operations and discuss, because I think it falls into that very well. One thing I just had on this as well, was on the let's see, which one was it? The big attachment, just the size of the print and the graphs. I don't know about anyone else, but I had trouble getting the numbers even with a magnifying glass. So if we could kind of get that graphing and something that we could see more easily. And on our grounds crew, we typically get an annual cost of operation of that and a breakdown, and I don't think we've gotten that in the last year. And looking at it, our reports have been kind of different from year to year. We need to get that standardized, and would look forward to a report from the grounds crew on that at some point in time.
If you recall, we provided our first report last fall in November in the new format, and going forward, we plan to use that format and present it in that way in that time frame.
Okay, and we've got all the years under that same, the old years under that same format, so we can look at it, and we're comparing.
We only go back 3 years in the report. We don't take a historical look back any farther than 3 years.
Right, well, I mean, the program has, I don't forget exactly when we brought it back in-house, but.
Right.
Okay, very good.
Any further questions? Thank you, Dave. How about the annual workplace safety report? Is that you too?
That's me too. Okay, again, 3 quick points. The main active safety committee is actually our physical plant safety subcommittee, is what we call it. We manage the safety program for the facilities group, which consists of custodians and craftsmen, the people that maintain the buildings, basically. And the things that we focus on are the physical problems and improvements that need to be made to make the environment as safe as possible for staff and students. This subcommittee also monitors our physical plant safety training program, and ensures that we, in the past year, we trained forklift drivers, trained 30 employees on power scissor lifts to get them licensed. We keep our certification up for our internal asbestos safety team, so that if we have emergencies, we have trained people that can get to the site quickly. Those same people are also authorized to supervise other certified contractors in doing abatement projects on school grounds. So we keep those guys up to date. And then finally, that subcommittee supervises the monthly safety training for about 130 facilities maintenance employees. So that's what that group does. They also review accidents, and that's point number 2. Accidents, recordable accidents for the district are down slightly from last year. We have 47 so far this year. That sounds like a pretty big number. It was actually about 57 at this point last year. So we're a little better. In the physical plant itself, we've had 8 recordable accidents. And we're analyzing those and continue to work on those. Finally, the third point is inspections, and you're probably aware that the local fire departments do fire inspections of all of our schools on a regular basis, usually annually. But in addition to that, we have several insurance inspections that take place throughout the year. IPSIP, which Les mentioned earlier, the Iowa Public School Insurance Program, contracts with inspectors, and we also have a local insurance group, AWL Ambrisco, that work with us as well to inspect our schools for both fire safety and just general safety procedures and code requirements and so forth. And over the last 3 years, all of our schools have been inspected at least once by one of these third-party inspections. And we respond to the inspections as well as we can with improvements and corrections. And then we also use that input as we're doing our building renovations and as we're going through design reviews on new buildings to be sure that those changes are incorporated too.
We also do annual boiler inspections in all the buildings that still have them. So we do that with the CHUP group.
Any questions on that?
On your training, do you require or provide any OSHA training to staff, like an OSHA 10? Is that a requirement of staff?
We have done specific training for those that require it, such as lockout, tagout, and confined space, and several other requirements like that. Other things that are mostly an awareness requirement, we cover through our online monthly training. Some things we handle like like the right to know requirements and accident reporting and things like that. We'll do an annual refresher. Other things we'll do every 2 or 3 years.
Okay, but a like OSHA 10 requirement is not a requirement of district employee.
Go ahead.
The full OSHA construction safety requirement does not really apply to our group. So,
However, we do require that all our general contractors have a safety program that's included in the program as part of the specifications. So our outside vendors do have that program.
Other questions? Hearing none. Thank you, Dave. Appreciate that update. We'll move on to the Equity Advisory Committee update. We're talking about Objective 3 discipline tonight.
Hi, everybody. I'm Yolanda Rivera. Nice to see you again, and thank you once again for having us present to you tonight. We know you've had a lot of information tonight, so there's a lot in here, but we'll try to go through it as quickly as we can. Last time we talked about the importance of ensuring we looked at achievement data through an equity lens, and in the same way, tonight we're going to talk about how we can and should look at discipline data through an equity lens. In our conversations, we have been very grateful. We had Director Callahan, Coralville Central Elementary School Principal Gahan, and a couple of teachers and parents that have come out to our meetings and shared with us their experiences and their knowledge and their expertise, and we are extremely grateful for that. And with that, we have put together the presentation we have for you today. We have 3 key points that we want to, oops, sorry. Where's the? There you go, sorry. We have 3 key points that we want to share with you today. First, as with other aspects of the CEP, we must always look at data through an equity lens. Second, we must understand that there are multiple ways to approach student behaviors and disciplinary responses. And finally, we need to work through these complex and multifaceted issues and policies and practices surrounding discipline disparities. Tonight I have with me Jane Finch and Stephanie, and they will go over some of the other slides. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us. As Yolanda said, we have a lot of information, but I'm going to try to be expedient. My name is Jane Finch. I'm a parent in the district and a member of this committee. Okay, so once again, the Equity Committee started our investigation by looking at the data that is available through the annual progress report. As we shared with you back in February, our suspension and office referral data demonstrate significant disproportionality in discipline by race. In the charts we are sharing here, the far left-hand pie chart displays the proportion of students in each major racial or ethnic population in the district. In particular, notice the yellow portion of the pie chart, which represents white students, and the orange portion, which represents black students. The second pie chart displays out-of-school suspensions, the third in-school suspensions, the fourth office referrals. In all three of these charts, you can see that black students are disciplined at a far higher rate and white students at a far lower rate than would be expected if race were not a factor. As a committee, we discussed some of the reasons we give for the disproportionality that these charts display. For some, the charts make sense because they perceive students to actually misbehave at different rates. What we are learning from the implicit bias research nationally and our own investigations here in Iowa City is that this is not only or even the most accurate explanation for disproportionality. Instead, several biases that are revealed through research no doubt contribute to these disciplinary outcomes, such as confirmation bias, where we looked for misbehaviors among children of color more than we do among white students. This was revealed in a recent preschool study that tracked teachers' eye movements and was illustrated by students who share their perceptions or who gets in trouble for what. Unfortunately, sharing images like we just shared in this pie chart also can serve to reinforce biases that students of color misbehave. We need to continue to dig into what our data can and cannot tell us about actual events and outcomes in our schools, and we need to be cognizant about how these data may unintentionally reinforce bias. Getting students to behave in a way that is conducive to learning and creating a positive school culture that influences achievement is a challenge. Discipline, culture, and achievement are interconnected and can influence each other positively or negatively in a reciprocal way. For example, time spent in learning is the single best predictor of positive academic outcomes, but office referrals and exclusionary discipline, such as suspensions, remove students from the classroom. Suspensions are known to be associated with lower achievement, higher dropout rates, and an increased involvement in the juvenile justice system. So, behavior and disciplinary responses matter deeply to student experiences and outcomes. As we noted last month, we are anxious to get beyond just diagnosing the problem to addressing them through policies, guidance, and practices. One approach to policy that has been tried nationally and has been taking some heat lately is zero tolerance. When the context of a behavior is removed from its consequence, this is called zero tolerance discipline. Zero tolerance uses a matrix approach to punishment with a set of predetermined consequences for problem behaviors and does not allow educators to consider circumstances that drive behavior. Zero tolerance policies are associated with high rates of suspensions, larger disparities in discipline, and there is no data to suggest that zero tolerance policies change behavior. In 2014, the U.S. Department of Education and the U.S. Department of Justice jointly issued a Dear Colleague letter to all superintendents of schools, which emphasized the need for alternatives to exclusionary discipline and the importance of a positive school climate. Data cited in that letter indicated that students of color and students with disabilities were more likely to be suspended or expelled nationwide. Among the evidence-based recommendations for a solution, they listed restorative justice practices, which is a practice the Equity Committee has spent some time digging into. Other examples in that Dear Colleague letter include conflict resolution, counseling, and structured systems of positive interventions. Additional examples being worked on in our district include trauma-informed practices and mindfulness. As an example of the work we are glad is taking place, we want to share a bit tonight about the practice that we dug into the most, restorative justice. What we are learning is that restorative justice, or RJ, is an approach to discipline that focuses on building relationships and repairing harm and shifts the focus of discipline from punishment to learning. RJ is not about letting kids off the hook, but about changing the way accountability is achieved. Consider bullying, for example, which is a relationship issue. Carefully engaging the bully, the person who is bullied, and the bystanders can help to change behavior in a way that is far more useful and real than a suspension or an agreement not to talk or a forced apology. It is not just an alternative response to dealing with problematic behavior, though. It is a paradigm shift of creating a community of support in the classroom, and when implemented correctly, is an intentional process of developing relationships between students and staff, which we learned earlier is very important to achievement, and even amongst the staffs themselves. This carefully laid groundwork can proactively prevent behaviors and also allows for the response to conflict to further strengthen relationships, build trust, and encourage student engagement. In this way, RJ contributes positively to school safety as well. What is this district's experience with RJ, and is it working? Southeast Junior High has been a pilot school during the past year for school-wide restorative practices, which have focused on building relationships in the classroom, as well as RJ and implicit bias training for staff. This year, there were 257 office referrals for both major and minor offenses, compared to 360 referrals during the same time period for the previous year, which suggests that, even though the real effects won't be seen for quite some time, some of these practices seem to be making a difference for kids right away. We really just scratched the surface as a full committee in our review of disciplinary practices and outcomes. We were pleased to hear from Andy Gahn, principal at Coralville Central, who described for our committee his strategies for building relationships and community with a diverse population of students and their families. Initiatives have included monthly family nights and daily classroom meetings. With the implementation of these morning meetings, he has seen a progressive reduction in office referrals each month, from 73 in October to just 20 this past April. Disciplinary matters, when they do occur, are treated as opportunities to make better choices, and because these incidents are never the first time he is interacting with a student and their family, they are usually handled without much difficulty. He acknowledges that this approach to school culture involves a time investment for him and his staff up front, but this is more than recuperated in time saved with a reduction in problem behaviors and office referrals.
We need a deeper examination of issues, policies, and practices. Sometimes we make rules without thinking about the kids that are showing up at our school. Disparities are not inevitable, and this has been shown by some districts, such as Oakland, California, and Rochester, New York, that have adopted restorative practices. Restorative justice is a trauma-informed and culturally competent approach. The learned survival behaviors of youth carrying trauma can be disruptive in a classroom, but students can learn new behaviors through practice, and healing from trauma takes place when they feel they are being heard, respected, and valued. Additionally, finding ways to include kids, giving them opportunities to learn about and from people like them, working with their culture and not against it, and creating a school environment where they feel a sense of belonging are all vital. This again underscores the importance of recruiting, retaining, and supporting teachers and administrators of color. These issues of equity are all inextricably linked. A deeper examination of this district's matrix discipline policies is needed, including a review of the disciplinary policies and procedures, also known as the DPP, a matrix-oriented manual, how it is being implemented, and how it is affecting student achievement and student climate. In accordance with the Dear Colleague letter mentioned earlier, the development and implementation of discipline policies should involve students and their families, should follow proper due process procedures, and all discipline-related materials should be posted on district websites. Consideration should be given to reviewing the DPP for cultural competency and restorative justice options. We dug pretty deep into these issues as a committee, and yet there is still more work to be done. Understanding student behaviors and adult disciplinary practices is both complex and urgent. With that, we have a few takeaways and recommendations for actions. In terms of key takeaways, discipline, school climate, and achievement are all interdependent. Utilizing discipline as an opportunity for social and emotional learning is important to achievement, and these self-regulation skills are essential to a child's success. Building relationships, Community and a positive school culture takes more time up front, but adds value and efficiency in the end. Restorative justice requires a paradigm shift. This can be challenging, but the district has shifted to meet many cutting-edge standards in other aspects of education and can do the same to move away from exclusion as its primary approach to discipline. Implicit bias training and a trauma-informed approach to discipline is important in this process. Zero-tolerance policies are quick and easy, but are not effective in changing behaviors. We recommend convening a subgroup to review and advise on approaches to understanding behavior and disciplinary responses, which could include better understanding and connecting district initiatives such as restorative justice, implicit bias, PBIS, and trauma-informed care. Revisions to the DPP for cultural relevance and inclusion of restorative options, and explicitly linking these discussions with those of school safety and anti-bullying. We recommend all district discipline policies should be publicly available on district websites. And we want you to know that this work will take time. Although results of restorative practices can be seen right away, full implementation takes 3 to 5 years. The board can immediately exercise leadership by ensuring the comprehensive equity plan is updated, and that discipline is one of the key issues that is carefully worked on by a diverse and representative subgroup. And the addition of a restorative coordinator to the superintendent's team of administrators could be a solid first step in reversing the current trend in discipline disparities. And this work will realistically take years. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions?
This discipline matrix that you referred to, is that the DVP?
Yeah, they call it the DPP.
I'm sorry,
Discipline protocols and procedures.
Okay, so it's DP?
DPP.
Okay, 1D, 2 Ps. And is that, is that? Go ahead, Matt.
I don't know the last time we presented it to it. I think maybe Phil and Lori were on the board at the time, but we had presented the different protocols and procedures and the different offenses to you. I think it was following a time we had reported out on some disciplinary numbers and what those statistics look like, and then we followed that with kind of a general overview of that handbook, and that was developed with some community partners, primarily by us, but through some of that work.
Right, and is that on every, or in every student manual, or is that too much in the weeds, or where the comments were is that it's, how accessible is it to the public if they want to look at it and review it? Is on the district website easily found?
I'd have to check on the website exactly where it's located, but as far as the student handbooks go, the protocols and procedures, there's a lot more information in there than we would put in a student handbook as far as potential consequences and things like that. So that's something we could definitely discuss with you guys if you felt like that needed to be better communicated. Something I think we have talked about internally that the committee brought up is how to lay some of those restorative practices onto the protocols and procedures handbook, so we kind of have the clear, consistent consequences that need to happen when actions happen, but what are also the restorative practices that should happen every single time one of those events occur too. And so that's something we just need to systematize and do with that handbook, and I kind of see that as our next step with that.
When do you expect that to happen?
I would see that work for us next year, about trying to put that just right into the protocols and procedures handbook as part of that.
Next school year?
Yep,
Okay.
next school year.
And,
it won't be done for the start of the school year, but that work we would take on next year.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they, I think Kate brought the DPP to the meeting, and there was definitely some examples of some lack of kind of cultural competency within that. But I think it's important to remember, before that we had nothing. We had no guidance. So this goes to our principals, so they have some consistent. But prior to that, it was just every principal did what they wanted, and there was no real manual. And this provides some, and it's huge. So it would be a lot of, it's really for principals to say, okay, when X happens, maybe these are some things to think about. And I think as we incorporate these restorative things in there, that'll be a probably constant working process that we're improving on. But I think it's a starting place where we're at least have something that's in every principal's hands that's consistent. And then now that we're looking at these other practices, and obviously we're looking at this from a lot of different angles, but restorative justice comes up a lot in a lot of these discussions. So it feels to me like we're in a good place to move forward next year to kind of get this restorative stuff kind of in there, and as we get principals trained in how to do it as well, it's going to be an important piece.
We just careful balance when we look at like you said, the discretion piece to, as Jane talked about, zero tolerance, right? We need to have some kind of balance in there, and I think that's what the handbook has allowed us to do, is to have, some flexibility while also not having gross flexibility, that we treat students differently of different backgrounds or, in similar situations. And so that's something we have to be careful about, but we also don't want to be too prescriptive with what that is before the events even occurred. We need to have some discretion in there. So I think it's given us some good guidance that way, but we kind of have a next iteration of it to take on.
And question for the Equity Committee, you mentioned one of your next steps is to update the Comprehensive Equity Plan. What's your process for that and timeline?
We would like, if we have the opportunity, to work with the administration hand in hand, so we could look at where these revisions need to be done and what's best to move forward in a more concise manner. I don't know that we have a date set yet, but we are in communication.
Yeah, definitely. I think that ultimately, Kate came and presented for, 15 minutes on a document that had spent considerable amount, like 2 years putting together. And so I think that we need to have a more in-depth, as the Equity Committee has already articulated from a subgroup standpoint, as far as diving more into the conversation related to discipline, because there's a lot more information that we need to discuss in relation not only to discipline, but I think we just talked about hiring as well. And so convening that subgroup, I think, is an appropriate next step to kind of move that conversation forward, because in order to do the work right, we're going to have to spend a lot more time to discuss it and kind of get to the core of some of the issues.
Yeah.
And if we could just, would it be possible to add the DPP to this meeting or to this attachment? So any person watching this that wanted to access it directly, if we could make that available electronically?
Yeah, I'll see what kind of format we have it in. I'm not sure. We could probably come up with something. I'll just have to work with Kate to see what kind of electronic format she has that in, if it's in multiple files right now, or if it's all in one comprehensive one, or what it looks like. So
if it is a type of thing
Yep.
that we could put it in there, and then that way anyone that was interested in looking at this, it would be available and accessible.
Any other
Thank you.
questions?
Thank you, guys.
Thank you all so much. Appreciate it very, very much. Okay, we're going to move to discussion items. Policy and governance report, Paul.
So Policy and Governance had a meeting last Tuesday. We had 4 items on the agenda. You'll see 3 of them attached. That closes out our 3 things that we still needed to cover for the year. There is no change. All the changes are listed. There was no changes to the number 3, the board governance. There were some changes that we suggested to the superintendent directions. You'll see them highlighted in there. The ones highlighted in blue that we crossed out mainly dealt with the diversity policy, which we don't have, so we decided to take those out. You also see a couple grammar changes, maybe in the yellow, switching some words and adding a couple words to a couple of those. So as you read through those, just take a look at those. As always, we bring these to you to be able to see, and then in the next meeting, we would look to approve them. The 4th item on there, the board policy structure, we will actually talk about that here in a couple minutes.
Thank you. Any questions for Paul? All right, operations, Sean.
All right, I'm going to kind of talk about how we, in the order that we had our meeting, because it's not in the order of our agenda, but we started the conversation with an update from the Playground Committee, and they have put together a playground handbook, which is very prescriptive in how to go through the process of, when it comes to designing the playground, parent groups and things like that, things to think about as they go through that whole process, and just trying to define that process so it's not, a very one-off thing at a school does it one way and some other school does it another way. So that was a really nice thing to see. It was not prescriptive in it needs these exact pieces on every playground or anything like that, although they are looking to, as a committee, have an expert come in and help with that to try and get some sort of, I guess, basic rules set kind of as to, things they want to see in a playground. So that was a nice thing to see that handbook. We did kind of morph into the local vendor preference as we talked about the Terracon contract and moved into local vendor, so it all kind of merged together. The takeaway from that is if we aren't feeling that the process was adequate to get to a solution, and picking a vendor and the whole process was not what we wanted, instead of just picking apart this one specific thing, we are going to go back and look at what our procedures and policies are in regards to how we pick vendors and choose services and things like that. So as one of my to-do lists is kind of go through and find the relevant parts in our policy so that our next ops meeting, we can kind of look at those and, if they're not good enough, they need to be better. And look at it from that lens instead of picking apart one specific instance. The big topic after that was the safety task force. I brought it up at the last meeting. We had a conversation where we kind of went all over the map a little bit, going from whether we had a task force or a committee or what the difference was and what we really wanted them to do. And I'll save you the whole long story, but the condensed version is it's creating a committee with some directions on places to start. It's kind of how that's going to play out. So we've given direction to admin of some of the questions we want to have answered in regards to school safety and what some of the makeup we want to see from that team. So they'll be putting together that group. And the last thing, we had an update on the IPM committee that Dave gave us, actually, to talk about a lot of stuff that's changing. Again, the long story short, a lot less spraying, a lot less pesticide use. Those are great things. They're looking to expand how much of that they're not spraying, how much of our grounds are not doing, and really looking at least invasive practices before they have to ramp up to needing to spray in places. So it was a nice little update, and everything was on the agenda from that meeting, so you can see some of the highlights of that too if you want to see them.
Can I add a couple things?
Absolutely.
One is related to the Playground Committee continuing their work, and I think we asked the Playground Committee to consider an inclusive statement or resolution, and we heard Tony speak about that at community comment tonight, and I think Kingsley is the admin lead on that committee. You had indicated that was going to be something the committee would take on to investigate. And then the other thing we talked a bit about was the Longfellow Playground, because we were waiting for the report of the Playground Committee to go to the Operations Committee since we deferred the vote on that playground. And I think what we agreed was we would try to do some work to see if there were some modifications that could be made, understanding the timescale we were under, that we needed to proceed at some point to approve a playground for that school. And I think what we agreed was that we'd see that come forward in the second May meeting.
Our next meeting.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yes, and you're absolutely right. We will, I note very much what Tony said too, that we need to give direction and everything that as far as where we stand on that. And one of the things in our Playground Committee we recognize is that we need some help with some technical assistance and things, and that's some expertise. And so Dwayne's in the process of coming up with an RFQ, request for qualifications, and look for that assistance. But yes, and I would urge, and when we get to agenda setting, we'll put that Longfellow Playground on for the next meeting. Granted, we won't be completely to that done with all of our work, but we are up against a calendar and things like that, and we will do our best to make it the best one we can going forward. One thing I would like to put in on the discussion, and Sean did a very good job of summing it up, that when it comes to the IPM, you know, our goal is to get as close to zero as possible, recognizing that that may be unattainable, but that's our goal, and I think that we've made tremendous strides, and we just urge that, you know, we continue to make progress going forward that way, and I know Dave's working very hard to that end. When it comes to the Terracon contract, for myself, I'm not done with it. And this is my personal view, it stinks, and the smell isn't going away with time. So, you know, how we go about it with policy or whatever that way, addressing it for in the future. But as chairman of the Finance Committee, I'm not through looking into that, and some of the emails we received on that were very telling, and it's important we get to the bottom of it and we know exactly how this contract came to be. So.
Anything else, Sean?
I think that's it.
Thank you. So board governance model, I know this was something that P&G discussed as well. Paul, did you want to kick this off, or?
Thanks, Steve. Can probably cover it best.
And Joe was planning on being here. He was here for a while, but he had to step out because he's got some other obligations tomorrow. So we revisited. If you've been out to our board page, I won't pull it up right now, but if you've been out to our board page, you know that we've got quite a range of places where we have policies, guidelines, procedures, et cetera, parked. And there's overlap and sometimes redundancy, and certainly a lot of confusion, both by the community, often by board members, and sometimes even among employees in the district who've worked with it for some time. So we had a pretty extensive conversation about what we may consider for future options. One of the things that we as a community transitioned to long before I got here was Carver policy governance, and we talked about the difference between that and policy governance, which is what IASB recommends that boards use. And we talked about some of the potential benefits for the district if we considered going through a conversion process from our current structure into something that's more aligned with policy governance. I know one of the things that Phil has asked repeatedly is what are these appendices to? And I'm sure he remembers as we went through the research and found out they were not appendices to anything. And so obviously one of the things with policy governance is you have policy, which reflects that which is going on at the state level in terms of requirements from either statute or Department of Ed, or Board of Educational Examiners. You may have local appendices that reflect local conditions and that are reflective of those state level issues. And then obviously guidelines and procedures that are designed to implement those specific policies. And so we discussed creating that nested process. We've had some lengthy interaction with Joe about that. He's very much in favor of it. And has indicated a willingness to help us if that's something that the board chooses for us to walk through. So, Paul, what did I miss?
I think you covered it.
All right.
I'm very interested in going through this process. Since the first time I went out to the website to look for our policies, I had a hard time navigating. Never fully understood the Carver policy governance model in its applicability for a school district. Just my personal opinion. Just the materials provided on this item is just a great example of the complexity that we're asking ourselves and our community to navigate, and district employees. It's a lot. It's not clean, in my humble opinion, and I think we can maybe relatively easily move through this conversion process, as you mentioned it, Steve. I know it's going to take time and energy, and we'll have to work our way through it, but I think it would set this district up for the next wave of good policy management. So I personally support moving through this work. and maybe setting a goal for ourselves for the next year to kind of take ourselves through this conversion process.
Go ahead. I was going to say, one of the things I think, if you as a board charge us to begin this process, we would certainly initiate that with Joe. I'd work with Paul as chair of P&G, recognizing that as we go through that conversion, there will be pieces of all of these links that you see in front of you on board docs that will go away, and they'll be replaced with other things, and that would be a process that Joe said obviously the easiest way to do that is one fell swoop, where you go in and do that. And the one thing I did not have a chance to ask him about with that was a time frame for getting that done. So we may need to eat the elephant one bite at a time, but definitely something that I think would be, as you said, a benefit for our stakeholders as they look for an easier way to access the work that we do as a district.
Yeah. So do we want to provide direction to go do? You said if we provided direction to go do, you could start at some point, once maybe we get through graduation. But I know it's awfully busy right now, and what's the appetite of the board to explore?
I think the committee was unanimous.
I think I'm the only board member that actually worked for a Carver. I worked for Roy Carver Jr. for 3 years, and I know he would not support the Carver model, even though it has his name.
I'm supportive.
All right, go do. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, moving to action items, modified FMP update. We have an exhibit that shows the accelerated plan for the facilities master plan. We've had a couple of work sessions. We've had some discussions at board meetings. I think we've gone through a lot of additional information that the administrative team, Dwayne and others, have provided to us. Question for board members on whether there's additional questions or comments that we would like to make before we move to approve.
Well, I would just I'll just start it with a motion, and then we can have a discussion, I guess, is probably the better way, but I move we approve the acceleration of the remaining projects as presented in Exhibit 8.
Second.
Comments, questions?
I have a question for the board. So we're undertaking this process of thinking about equity in our educational experience, in particularly our elementary buildings. And we have a sort of, I don't know if we're staying with it, but what we've said is we have a timeline of November 2018 to try and have some structure around what we want with that. You know, there's different elements that, and I don't know that we'll have all these decisions made, but what I'm thinking is, does the board feel like we can be far enough along in that process before we enter the design process for some of the schools that are being accelerated? Obviously, Wood and Kirkwood will start right away, so that's, you know, that's moving ahead if this passes tonight. But Shimmick, Wickham, Garner, Horn, Lemmy, Borlaug, if we were to decide as a board we wanted to have some programming changes, which might mean there's, I mean, if it's boundaries, it could mean that there's more students there. It could mean that there's less students there. If it's programming, it could mean that it's a magnet school. Could mean that it's a sister school. But all of those things, all of those decisions have impact on the facilities. And I guess what I want to try and make clear at this point is that I don't want to be told later on in our decision-making process that we can't do something because we don't have the facilities in that building. Right now, we are ahead of that. We are ahead of the design. So I just want to make sure that we don't have that as a reason why we can't do something. That maybe there's other reasons we can't do something, but I would like it not to be because we don't have the facilities to put that programming in place, whatever it is, whether it's a boundary change or a K through 2 building or what. So I'm wondering, does the board feel like we can stay and have with that timeline and have some progress made towards those decisions by the beginning of 2019, which is when the design process would start for the buildings I mentioned?
I guess one of my initial reactions is we are bound by what is approved by the bond.
Right, absolutely.
So we don't have infinite flexibility in terms of because I'm a huge proponent of the equity work that we need to do and to do it as methodically, but with a sense of urgency that we've talked about. In some of those decisions that we make, there certainly might have constraints or impacts on our buildings. I don't know, though, that we could use funds approved through the GO bond to do some of that work, because some of those projects were fairly straightforward. So I don't know that I just don't know how much flexibility we would have to address some of those changes that would come out of the equity work.
Well, we were told when we passed the FMP that there was going to be flexibility along the process, that there could be changes, not significant changes, but there could be some changes within the document that, maybe we put a preschool room in here, maybe we put a kindergarten room in here, maybe we put, I don't know, maybe Craig could speak to that, but we were told that there would be the flexibility to make some of those changes.
Just not infinite flexibility. Again, not knowing what is going to come out of our equity work, it's sort of hard to know.
I think the key part that I look for in that is, and what I've looked for in several of the designs that we've been looking at for some of the upgrades, is the flexibility of the rooms themselves that are being put in there, and does it allow for that room to be a kindergarten room or a 6th grade room or a science room or whatever it can be. And I think if we are limited at least by a pot of money at a school and maybe a certain number of rooms, if they're at least designed with flexibility in mind, then some of those changes that we look for can be adapted after the fact. I would agree wholeheartedly. I don't want to be told later, well, if you would have spent money differently, then maybe we could have done this change, but now we can't. So I'd be definitely looking in the design process for flexibility of space down the road for sure.
Well, I had some, I had objections to the bond because there wasn't specificity. And I was always told, no, Phil, it's in there. When I brought up concerns about special ed, when I brought up concerns about career and technical, it's in there. I would like to, with this, that we have a dollar amount or something locked in for career and technical, because we have approved ag education. It's new to our district, and it's going to happen in the fall of 2019, and that it's going to be extremely difficult for us to hire an instructor for a new program and new curriculum when there's no classroom. And to get a quality instructor to start this program and make it successful, we're going to have to provide facilities. And I want the promises that were made on the bond to be lived up to. And there's got to be a dollar amount tied to those facilities.
And we talked about, at our work session last week, or 2 weeks ago, we talked about the facilities, and I'm going to look back at my notes here. We had identified that when we put out the RFPs, we could say exactly what we want for career and technical. Is that what you're looking for? That when we put the RFPs out, that it would say?
Right.
I mean, I think it's hard to give a dollar amount.
Well, I think we can put a dollar amount on it. I think we budgeted in everything else in there. I think we can say that a certain amount of this bond money here is going toward career and technical that way. So it's. I don't think it's beyond our capability, and I want more than just a might. We might do this, or we'll see if we can. I want a serious commitment from this board for career and technical education with this, because the only thing that's guaranteed in this accelerated facilities master plan is that we will burn through $190 million in 3 years instead of 7.
Well, the design process, I think, is what you had told us would be that would be approved in October. So we would need to be seeing those designs ahead of that so that we could give that input. And, at that point, I am committed. I personally am committed to seeing career and technical in that design.
And
for
maybe
those
looking
buildings.
at the city and west processes helps to maybe conceptualize that. So you remember when we went through the west process, one of the things that we brought to you was a remodel of the kitchen, which included the transition of the current family consumer ed space to our commercial kitchen where we could serve food for students while we're going through the renovation, with the idea that as soon as we move past that, then that becomes part of our career tech ed program at West, because we now have a commercial kitchen, which allows us to significantly upgrade the courses that we're able to offer in FCS at West. City High, part of our design process right now is a conversion of that, what's currently used as the cafeteria for career tech ed space. And so as we're going through the design process, there's that opportunity, as you said, Lori, to build that out and to determine what content goes in there, which courses we're going to offer, and then that helps Matt and Dwayne and John as they go through and look at fleshing that room out and making sure that those rooms meet the needs of the content that's going to be offered at the school.
In June, you'll see the plans for Southeast Junior High, and we're revamping the family and consumer science rooms as part of the project. So those efforts are being made.
You will see those as we go through that design process. So to your point, Lori, that is something that should come back to you. You should see that. Certainly an opportunity to ask questions and seek some answers from us as we go through it. Our design process is a collaborative one where we work with other stakeholder groups as they go through that design piece, and so we get input and feedback from them. We can deliver that to you as we go through that, and that includes input from our career tech ed teachers.
When will those RFPs go out?
For which ones, Wood and Chimney?
If you mentioned Southeast, we'd be looking at that to approve it in June. So that's already out.
Yeah, it's already out. You'll be looking at the schematics for that. I think you've looked at all the other ones already, the four, North Central, Tate. I'm losing the other one. There's a fourth one that's
City
out
West
there.
and Liberty. When will the RFPs go out for the design?
For Liberty Phase 3, I put out a letter this week, subject to board approval, to get the RFP or the proposal back for that. I also put out a letter this week for Shimmick and Wood. Use the scope that's listed in the facility master plan, and that RFP is typically what I do. And then next spring, early spring, probably late January, early February, if you want to call it spring, we'd go out for the last 7. There's 7 that were slated to start in 2020 and be done in 2021. So we'd put those out for design in the spring of 19.
Which is why I was wondering if the board would have, by the end of 2018, whether we would be kind of coalesced around some themes in our equity work.
We have done a facility master plan update the last 2 Januaries. We do so again this year and talk about the specifics of the plan, and we're planning on doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I hear the concerns. But I also, as I'm learning this process, as I've started in September, that we just have to constantly be vigilant. So if it's career and tech, we need to stay on that. I don't, and I'm committed as well. And I like the flexibility that I've seen. I'm glad we waited. I think we made some good changes on this. I think we learned some things. I guess what I wonder is, if we approved, if we did what we did in the fall and we approved half of it moving forward, would we find other things in the next 6 months that we wanted to switch around? I don't have any ideas of what those would be at this point, but I think I like that we waited. I like some of the changes that we made and the reasons behind those. And I guess I'm committed to focus on flexibility in this plan, certainly to career and tech and to making sure, our special ed areas are what we need them to be. And with this, as far as the equity goes, I think, I think we just need to do that work, and I'm hopeful that we'll stay urgent, and maybe this will help us keep urgent to get that done by November. If indeed we see that we're having some decisions that are going to have real facility impacts, so that's kind of where I'm at with that. I mean, I wonder those questions, but
And I don't expect us to be done in November with our decision making. I mean, that's not what I'm looking for. I'm wondering if we'll have some ideas about different buildings
that will
and how they would be used. And since we've got, 7 of them here, this is a perfect time to do that.
I echo, again, I'm echoing you a lot tonight, but the sense of trying to if we approve this tonight, then it does, for me, put that additional bit of urgency on the equity work, just so that we can get as far along with that to understand the impact in time to implement changes in design or more flexibility or whatever the case may be. I think for me,
I think we got a lot of emails on this, and they all mentioned equity, and so I feel that the community is really behind all of that work, that they're going to really support making some big changes. I think maybe that there's folks in this community that haven't been but are now ready to really make some dramatic changes and recognize that it's needed. If we're really going to have an equitable district, it's not just about facilities, but it's also about where kids are going to school, and that's important.
Yeah, and to that end, it's not all about facilities. We got to start talking about curriculum at some point in time and student achievement. And we had a person come in from a school that's been recently renovated, and they're complaining the direction we're going. We're going to wipe out the new nice thing that they have, and everything that on a school. I think and we're getting the RFP on Twain, right? The copy of the original RFP. That we requested that at the last meeting or
For
several
which school?
meetings ago. On Twain.
Sure.
Yeah, if we can get that to know exactly what we're doing there. But no, I tell you, I have serious concerns that our haste will be in a situation we'll be chasing our tail, and trying to predict the future, especially we're going to lock this thing in for 3 years, go ahead and everything that way. I have real concerns with that, and ramping this thing up. I've heard from others that they're saying, well, now we can get back to not talking about facilities, and we can get into those discussions about curriculum and what's really going on in the classrooms. We're gonna if we increase the construction tempo from 7 years to 3 years, it's going to be extraordinary. It's going to take an extraordinary amount of our time on that alone. And like I say, we've got to focus on curriculum at some point in time and student achievement, and whether we're going in the right direction with what we're doing or not.
Yeah, I would like to point out, especially to you, Lori, that because of some of your efforts, when we had our facility workshops before we went out for the bond, we refocused on just adding classrooms, and we converted them to music and art rooms, and did those music and art room additions, and converting the existing rooms back into classrooms, which allows us to right size and improve those programs. And if you look at those 7 projects, quite a few of them are going to get music and art rooms as a result of that effort that this board made a year ago.
And for me, I think the reality is we're in a growing district, and we're just going to have to talk about facilities. I think that's just part of our work as board members. I agree with Phil. We do need to make time to talk about curriculum programming, equity, restorative practices, whatever. All the things we talked about tonight. But because we are growing and we are bursting at the seams in certain areas, we owe it to our students to create the facilities where they have room to learn. I think the other factor for me that makes this an easy vote is the savings that we'll gain throughout the process by accelerating the plan. And I think that is something that we owe to our taxpayers, to be as good stewards of the money that we've been granted through the bond process. So I think I agree. We need to make sure we're talking about lots and lots of different things, but the reality is, because we're growing, we have to deal with facilities. It's going to be a project and a priority for us.
I don't have anything to say. I'm ready to vote. I think you've heard everything I've had to say over the last year.
Anything else from anyone else? Ben, Kim, I think we're ready to vote.
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast, and the motion carries with Directors Rotland, Ressler, Godwin, Clausen, Malone, and Eystone voting yea, and Director Hemingway voting nay.
Thank you. Lincoln Elementary School easements.
I move to approve the resolution providing the easements at Lincoln Elementary School site to the City of Iowa City.
Second. Any discussion? Kim, we're ready to vote.
Online voting is open.
Oh, did you want to jump in?
My computer has decided to restart all of a sudden, so.
How would you like to vote?
Yay.
Thank you.
Getting ready to die.
See, updates earlier.
And the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
Next up, transportation appeals. And I believe we take these one at a time, though I do know there's a handful that are related to the same neighborhood and same question.
So I did, I spoke with the streets person in Coralville, the city of Coralville today regarding this road, this old Camp Cardinal Road. And, I mean, there are some issues there. They do try to maintain it as best they can in the wintertime. It's not one of their best maintained roads, but they do try. They do sometimes have to take the snowplow up backwards because it's very steep. However, we did hear from one of the parents that there's a lot of traffic on there going to Borlaug. So I guess that changes things a little bit. If there is a lot of traffic, then because one of the things they mentioned is there's not enough traffic to work the salt in to break up the ice. When it's very icy, they can't take a snowplow on it, and the only way to break that up is to have more traffic to break up the ice with the salt. So I'm getting into the weeds here, but so I just wanted to say that one question I have is that road being used by Durham?
Not currently.
Could we ask Durham if that's a route that they could take a bus on?
Yes, we have, and it is.
Okay. But they're not using it now, and I know the city...
We don't have a need to use it right this moment.
Okay.
So we're not using it even though there's families that live in that neighborhood that are using the bus now, and so Durham just doesn't happen to use that route?
That's correct.
Do we know why?
The number of kids they pick up lends itself to having it routed in a different manner at this point in time, and but with growth, with change, if Camp Cardinal are ever closed or anything like that, we would definitely use Camp Cardinal Road as a route.
And I talked to Esme earlier, and she can say this, but I just had a question about the code, and she explained it. So if you want to just tell them what you said to me, I guess that would be helpful.
So the code is sometimes misinterpreted to say, the safest.
Your microphone.
The code is sometimes misinterpreted to say that it is the safest and most passable route by a bus. So yes, it is. It can be used as a school bus, but we don't use it at this time. It is, and I didn't mention this to Mr. Rosler, but it is no difference than when we went back to the elementary with Linder Road. It's no difference where there's no sidewalks. It is a county, road within a city limit. It is a road that can be used, but we just don't use it.
Now, there were some of the speakers were disputing the distance. And I know we've been through this and everything at one point in time. Measuring from what we determine as the front of the school.
Right.
What are you saying the distances are?
Well, if you remember, you were on the board at the time we did the elementary piece.
I try to remember everything, Craig, but
right.
I'm an old man.
And one of the points of the 22 people that appealed the decision of the board at that point in time was we didn't have a standard way of measuring from that would comply with that code requirement, which is the middle of the street in front of the point of entrance to the campus. And we were using multiple points of entrances to some of our campuses. Coralville Central was a case study in that. And so we actually took the time to refine all of our buildings and identify that point of entrance, and then notified all the parents again based on that refined point of entrance. And so this wasn't an issue this time because we had already done that work. Northwest, for instance, we already have that point defined there. And what our routing software does, and we get updates on the geocodes from the county on a continuous basis. And most of the time they don't match Google and Yahoo. And so our parents always have a concern about that. But they are the geo points that the county provides us, and that's exactly how we measure it. From the front of the street and opposite the entrance to our building to the middle of the street, opposite the driveway of the parent. And so that's the measurement that's taken.
And what were the measurements?
They were provided in the appeals.
Okay.
And there's for the ones at Borlaug, they were roughly 1.93 at the farthest, and the ones at Southeast were right at 2. But in order to have mandatory busing, it has to be over 2.
2.1 or 2.01?
We round up at 5.
Okay.
2.5.
2.5.
Right, we round up.
Were there sidewalks on that road or a shoulder?
There is not a sidewalk on Camp Cardinal Road, but as Esme pointed out, it's the route that a bus would take, not a child or a pedestrian. The code is very specific on that. And that's another thing that happened during the appeals on the elementary, is that we actually had a family that appealed this to the AEA and then to the Department of Education. And they lived on Linder Road, which has no sidewalks, which has blind corners, which has ravines, which it's an almost identical situation. And the administrative law judge ruled in favor of the school district in that we were interpreting 285.19 correctly. And so we feel that we're on very firm ground in this recommendation to you.
So it's based on the passage of a school bus versus what's likely to be used by a pedestrian. I mean,
that's correct.
That's the issue, because it's the same issue with American Legion Road and the kids in the Windsor area trying to get to Southeast. They can't walk on American Legion Road. You cannot.
Right. There were, in that elementary decision, there were nearly 1,400 students impacted at that time, and we did receive 22 appeals. And this time there were only little over 40 students, I think 44 students impacted, and the 8 appeals that are in front of you this evening. But as you know, this was a 2-step process to eliminate discretionary busing and move to our current attendance support busing model that Joan has shared with you and that you've approved and endorsed. In fact, there is an attendance support bus at Southeast that continued. Otherwise, there would have been a lot more kids impacted at Southeast Junior High, but that attendance support busing kicked in. And there's also the pay-to-ride options that are always available to our families that are impacted by this decision.
So pay-to-ride is an option for everybody?
It's always an option.
Yeah. So I think we take each one of these requests at a time, and for each appeal, have a motion.
Have a motion if we choose to not do anything, correct?
Okay, I'm just trying to understand the protocol here. So there's 3 options presented.
We just decide if there's 1 or 2 that we want to take action on, we can do that, or if we just don't want to take action on any, we can choose not to. I'm sorry, take no additional action. Right. Says.
But we need to.
Craig, do we need separate action on each of these, or is one action for all appropriate?
Option 3, take action to deny the request for transportation. Well, they're laid out for you there. It's up to you which.
My question.
The question is, do they have to do 1 for all of them, or 1 each individually?
You can do them as a collective, absolutely.
But we need a motion for option 1 for the collection of these appeals.
Option 3 would be to deny the appeals.
But we don't need a motion if we decide to do number 1, right?
Correct.
Right.
We just decide not to do anything.
There just would be
That's the
no
difference
action.
between 1 and 3.
Yeah.
I think one.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to go down the line, I'm going to say 1 to all of them personally. But if there's anybody feels differently, like they want to pull one out, then I mean, I'm on leaning towards number 1 for all of them.
So essentially, if no one makes a motion, we're not taking action on any.
Got
But
it.
if someone makes a
Understood.
motion on 1 or all to do either option 2 or 3, that's when it needs to be second, and we need to move forward.
Just my
correct.
first time through these, guys.
And if we do 1.
Very well explained.
There's still an appeal process with grant.
There is.
Yes.
Choose
Right.
if they choose to do so, so.
Right, so option 1 really is sort of like option 3. I mean, in terms of the responses that the families can take. Okay.
I'm supportive of option 1.
Yeah, I mean, Janet, honestly, you could probably just say, does anybody feel
Does
differently?
anyone want
Otherwise
to
we
pull
move on.
anyone out for a different option 2 or option 3? Hearing none, I think we're agreeing option 1, taking no additional action on these appeals.
Thank you.
And thank you for your patience. Okay, director liaison reports, anything anyone wants to add to what they've presented?
I do. I attended, as well as several other directors, the Silver Salute, and it was a great event and, a wonderful opportunity to honor those that's retiring and the years of service. But I just wanted to acknowledge the amount of time and effort that our staff put into making that event a huge success, especially Kristen. So thank you so much. It was a great event. I'm looking forward to being able to attend 3 more. So great job.
I would just had, thanks to the foundation too for their work in that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it was really a fantastic event.
Really nice.
Yeah, I'm always terrible with these things, and I attended the FFA convention on April 23rd, and there's a group photo I meant to have included, and I think Kim can put it in, or we'll put it on the next one, of the students that went there. They had a great experience. I ran into one at the art exhibit at the U of I Credit Union.
Yeah, the Hani El-Khadi
art exhibit, and I thought I recognized her from the FFA convention, and she was recognized as an exceptional artist, and she did some very great work. And I asked her, how she had a good time and everything, and she's really psyched about it, and that. So I think it's important we reach out to those students. I also attended the Silver Salute, and it's a great ceremony put on. And one thing I may just throw out is Kevin Hoyland, who is behind the scenes right now. His last time with us is next meeting, and if we could bring him behind the curtain, maybe to come up here on his last night. Having known him from Sabin for a long time, I think it would be nice to have him out here, because he's attended, I think, he's attended more board meetings than me, which is saying something, and anyone else. So I think we should recognize him. And there was one other thing that's escaping me right at the moment. Oh, and that's unfortunate Dwayne took off, but I wanted to thank Jeff Barnes and Dwayne for their assistance at getting that ACE project at the track at City High back on track. The students have their walls up, and they're making some real progress on it with some favorable weather and things like that, and it's great to see a large group of students, and John Reynolds is to be commended with what he's doing there, and it's a great thing to see. So.
I'll only mention, I didn't put it in here, but I did go to the, not as a board representative, but I'm on the board for the Rape Victim Advocacy Program, and I went to their gala, and one of their main honorees is a hero of Title IX nationally, and we're going to name a school after her, and so I got to see Christine Grant honored that night, and that was a real treat.
And since you are mentioning things that aren't attended in the capacity of a board member, I attended a conference in which there was a discussion from the Department of Education about Attendance Matters, which is a statewide initiative, and I'm actually hoping to bring that discussion to the the Education Committee at some point, so we can talk about that. And I also want to say, Horace Mann Elementary Carnival may choose to do their dunk tank every year, and I will look for someone else to volunteer next year.
We thought you were going
dunked
to
a lot?
volunteer every year, was what that statement was going.
I think we can take turns.
I have one quick one. As we just discussed recently, how we can't stop talking about facilities. I was invited to attend the Homeschool Assistance Program parent meeting that Superintendent Murley was at. And one of the things that they wanted me to bring on to everyone, or pass on to everyone, is that as we look at future needs for facilities, to not forget them. And they discussed at length some of the facilities constraints that they have at Trek, and I just wanted to throw that out there as we continue to work on the future years of our FMP, to not forget them. So,
Mentioning that.
I just have two quick ones. I do want to point out on the 19th, I went to the 5th Ward Saints kickoff meeting, and you'll actually, when we get to agenda setting, I'm going to suggest having them come in at the next meeting. And then I also wanted to say that Ruthina and Lori and Janet and myself participated in this district step challenge, and I'm pretty sure the district kicked our butt. We never showed up on the top of the list, so I'm just assuming we didn't do very well.
I own that. You guys were fantastic.
But I appreciate the district allowing us to participate in that as well.
I participated individually, also did not make it in the top.
Well, next year we'll have you, JP, instead
Just
of Janet.
swap you for me.
I don't know that I would help too much.
You don't get a lot of steps in yoga. That's my problem. Okay, are we ready to go to legislative update? They're done.
Yeah, I don't want to go after you guys next time because I don't have good news. So I'll get this out to you. The UEN Steering Committee met today. One of the big things we talked about was the impact of Senate File 2417, which is the change in the income tax process for both individuals and corporations. Maybe tonight at this late hour, I will spare you the agony of the projected deficits that are coming forward over the course of the next 6 years. Obviously, they struggled to make their budget work this year and had to make some mid-year adjustments. So we collectively, as a group of superintendents and board members, had quite a bit of angst about what's going to happen next year with supplemental state aid, given the fact that they're going to start with a deficit in their planning process from day one. So that's my legislative update for tonight.
Tell me a little bit about the backfill that
backfill
is or is not getting funded. And
so keep in mind, when you look at backfill, one of the things you'll hear a lot about, especially locally here, is you'll hear from our municipal partners, our city governments and our county governments, because remember, we have a spending authority. And so if they take away backfill, we still have the ability to levy to the authority. The city and the county does not. And so there's an enormous hit to them. So backfill is definitely not, that issue is not going away. Actually, we talked about that at length too. That's something that's likely to show up at the beginning of the session the next time. I think the way that they described it was the death knell has already been sounded. So, Craig, I don't know if you've got any more to add to it.
It only really impacts your fixed rate levies like PEPL. And otherwise, your rate floats to compensate. So our local tax rate will go up as a result of less backfill.
Wait, I do have one bright note. So they did change some things on sales tax. So if you are a Netflix subscriber or any of the other streaming services, there will now be sales tax collected on that. So that will provide an additional revenue stream for us through SAVE. So I'll end on a high note.
Just want to point out, Steve and I were talking about this before the meeting, that thanks to our community and our discussion about the FMP, that we were able to pass that GO bond and not have to wait for the extension of stay, which didn't happen. Some of our neighboring communities were relying on that, and now they'll have to go back to the drawing board. So.
And I think the thing that's most unfortunate about that is they had the votes to pass it, but the Senate has a very firm and fast rule that if they don't have a specific number of senators who have spoken out in favor of it and plan to vote for it. They will not bring it forward to the floor, the majority party. And so they did not have enough, even though they knew they would have all of the Democrats voting for it. So they had the votes to pass it, but they chose not to bring it forward.
All righty, thank you for that. Agenda setting for the 22nd.
Well, I see that we've got Longfellow on there, and I think we can challenge the Playground Committee to come up with some language to possibly put in there, as well as concerning inclusive playgrounds and that type of a thing. Also, with our speakers that we had here this evening, I don't know if we could sneak in a discussion on dress code when we have a bunch of students come in and talk to us about that. If nothing else, just a report and an update along that. And with the community.
In terms of a report or update, are we just?
Well, just what the policy is and that type of a thing, the concerns that were raised by the students. I remember.
I think we could get that out to you before the next board meeting.
Okay.
I don't think we have to wait for that. We can push that out.
And also with the large number of commenters concerned about the LGBTQ curriculum and things like that. I don't know if there's anything that.
I think we should push some clarification out on that too. That was also one of the notes that I took. I think that in terms of what we've done so far, I think there's some confusion. I think it might help if we clarified some of the actions that have been taken. So we'll get that out to you too.
Excellent. And I know last time I had put on for a Longfellow update, and I just want to make sure, and I've gotten that I don't. What I'm interested in is a update from the superintendent just on volunteer and staff background checks, that type of a thing, that we could inform the public on what we're doing. And it's not something that I think requires Joe Holland to be part of that discussion, and wouldn't want us to incur any expense by legal counsel just to inform what our policies are.
So you're just looking for an update on what we do for employee background screening and volunteer screening?
Yeah, that'll be adequate. And in the future, if there's any concerns on something I bring up, and I'm sure that there will be many, before you call Joe, just give me a holler and just make sure we're on the same page that way.
So Janet, in policy review, just we can move forward those 3 policies that we talked about today, so we can take action on those. Also, as I mentioned, the Fifth Ward Saints presentation, I know this meeting is more of an action meeting, but Carlos Honore, who is heading up that program, currently lives in Houston, where he runs the program down there, and is moving up here to run it here. He will be in town that week, and when we were there, we talked about having them come in and just give a brief presentation about what that is, because it is something that is going to impact students in our district in a positive way. So if we could have I know it's, like I said, it's not a presentation meeting, but if we could have a presentation on there, that would be great.
Yeah, let's do that. So we've captured those items for the next agenda. Then we also have a work session on the 22nd, and I think from our last work session around the equity discussion, I think we wanted to look at the presentation that you guys all have a draft of, and come back with a conversation on how we can continue to refine and craft that sort of information sharing material, and then also next steps on our path on exploring equity in the schools, boundary discussions, et cetera. So another work session, I think that's the primary topic, yes? Anything else for the work session?
So, sorry, clarification. So for the work session, it's the equity report and how that ties into our future planning for boundaries.
Yeah, is that PowerPoint that we sent out because the board had not seen it the last work session. Mm-hmm. This is a chance to respond, to refine, to clarify.
Not the equity report.
No, I'm sorry, not equity. The one, what do you call it?
Yeah. That one. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And when we get to that discussion, I'm wondering we have resources within the community that may be able to be helpful. One being Sarah Barron, the Executive Director of Affordable Housing for Iowa City. I've been in communication with her, and she's more than willing to lend her voice. So I'm wondering if it would be appropriate if we could invite her to, if she's available, to sit in on that work session. Just if there's questions that come up, she could provide some input and feedback. Great, thank you.
Excellent. All right, I think we're done.
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Not too quick.
Work session now?
There was a minute when I was worried we wanted to make it through the agenda, and we had the first discussion.